Ones that are successful loved what they did so they could persevere. So you got to love it. You got to have passion.
But it's just funny to see that now that the interest rates are going this way, the housing market is going this way, and now welcome all the big players in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now that mom and dad can't do it anymore.
Let me ask you guys a question because I love you guys already, and I'm just going to take it straight controversial right out the gate.
Yeah.
Let me know if this makes sense. Obviously, we saw things play out the last 2 years with the pandemic and stuff. Is it possible that this was a massive debt trap? Is that a possibility here in your opinion?
I mean, it's so funny, right? Because and on the seriously,
yeah, I'm busting it out.
on the context of like Twitter, right? Like, because Twitter's like very conspiratorial, right? Like,
Yes.
so I did post the Blackstone thing. There, everyone's like, yeah, like, why do you think that the Liberal government introduced like or they're going to ban the blind bid? Because then Blackstone can buy at scale and always know that they're paying market value. And I'm like, holy fuck! Like, I thought I was kind of conspiratorial, but like,
Oh, you haven't seen
I was like,
shit yet.
I hear some of this shit, and I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
holy, I'm right?
you-
Like that
Yeah,
one's like
yeah,
that's like
no,
a.
it's-
So do I think? Okay, there's a statement. I can't remember the guy's name now. Is it Adam something? The guy who wrote what's the yellow comic book?
Hello, comic.
The Watchmen. The
Okay,
Watchmen.
yeah.
The author of that.
Yeah.
Is Alan something. Anyway, he has this quote where it's like, people want to believe conspiracies because
course.
there's a comfort in
Yes.
imagining that someone's in control of this shit.
Mhm.
That's more comfortable than realizing that absolutely
It's
nobody's
just
in fucking
complete
control.
chaos.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And I do prescribe to the fact that we're like in this marginally controlled chaos. Like, I actually don't think I would give. Like, people are like, oh, our politicians are shit and I hate them and they're all so stupid. And
Yeah.
it's like, but they're also smart enough to like
That's
create this
position
elaborate,
and do that.
like, you know, like, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think that probably a lot of it's just imaginings and people.
It definitely could be, and I agree with you because if you think about the government being in control of anything, like look at the DMV, look at anything that's sort of bureaucratic, nothing is efficient at all.
It's archaic.
It's
Yeah,
so
it's all
archaic.
archaic.
Everything takes way longer than it should. So from that perspective, yes. But if you look at the financial side of it, right? Like, let's circle back. Pandemic kicks off.
Are we
Correct me
talking
if
like
I'm wrong.
central banks and like?
Yeah,
funding it?
kind of like all of it. I mean, again, I don't want to make it sound conspiratorial. I just want to sort of put it out there and have people think about it for the possibility of it being something that could have played out. But at the very beginning, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys know the stats. That's why I love having this with you guys. But I think the housing market post 2017, when things started to dip and then it bottomed, up until the pandemic sort of started, we were kind of trending in what, single-digit growth, I want to say?
Yeah, we were like, it was growth at inflation or like just
Pretty
over
much.
inflation.
Which
Like, we were
is-
yeah, I think from peak, we still hadn't recovered from, it took 2 years of COVID to get us back to 2017.
Right? So that's the thing. But what happened when the pandemic kicked off? And more importantly, this was a global event. It was the global black swan that probably guys like us were like, because I've tried to call it a few times over the last few years where I'm like, this is it. It's
Yeah.
happening, But this time it really felt like it, especially that first 2 weeks when everything grinded to a halt. The Dow Jones dropped like,
Yeah.
30, 40%?
I was on COVID like before that.
Were
Like,
you?
Yeah, man. I was like,
Holy fuck.
I think if anything, COVID made me like less conspiratorial
Okay.
because I was like,
explain.
you can be right and like the world doesn't have to like end as a result. Like, we can
Absolutely.
still just like continue fucking it up and scraping by, right?
Yeah.
Like, and making more of a mess and more chaos,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think it's like you look at all these people trying to jockey for control globally.
course.
Anyway, so on COVID, like I was prepping. Like I was actually
Are
like,
you-
I was like in the fucking
This guy's
Wait, was
Walmart.
this before?
Like,
Was this before or like right as it kicked off?
no, like this was when it was like January, like pre
Oh,
getting
so
to
you're
like.
still watching shit happen in China, and you're
And I'm
already
like,
thinking,
I remember saying to all my buddies, I'm like, this is gonna fuck the whole world up. And they're like,
Wow.
no. They're like, man, like they're like, honestly, like I love you, dude, but like
Yeah.
you've lost it. They're like, you've completely lost it.
shit.
And I'm like going to fucking.
Dan's out buying cans of tuna and bulk
Seriously, man,
toilet
like
paper.
going to
This
Walmart,
guy was one of the
dropping,
early
like-
guys that started the toilet paper crisis.
No way.
No, I didn't. I
started the
toilet paper-
trend. He
I was
set
like,
it off.
Yeah, I was like, I'm just gonna shit in the streets. I don't need toilet paper.
Yeah, there you
if
go.
the world ends, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
But no, it's like I think people like don't want to imagine change like that at that scale,
course.
right? Like, and it's like I didn't know. I had no. I would never say I knew how things were going to play out, but I was like, whatever this is, it's going to be huge. I don't know what like
so
the
you
world's
mean
going
to
to
tell
look like.
me when back then, like if we're talking in January, even February, like when remember those videos that were coming
Yeah,
out
from
of
China, man. Like
Yeah.
the guys spraying down the streets
fuck?
with like
People
disinfectant.
dropping
Well,
dead.
those videos
Yeah.
are back now. They're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
the
they
exact
are.
same thing
Yeah.
now.
Which is interesting that you brought that up. I love this shit because I think that a lot of the macro, and I know you're like this too, but like a lot of the macro ends up coming sort of to our shores
Right.
in one way or another.
Right.
But for me, I mean, like, and again, I've seen you post about this and I talk about it, and I'm sure you would agree too. But like, COVID starts, I guess you could say we had a deflationary scare for a couple weeks there
Yeah.
initially, right? And so that already tells us that that's literally the most fearful thing to any central bank or government. That's what they're actually really scared of. And then they just started buying up mortgage bonds by the fucking hundreds of billions.
Yeah, and they were basically going back to the same repo that they were doing in post 08, which like I actually support. I think that's a great in America where they have businesses.
Yeah.
In Canada, our economy is like 5 telcos, 5 banks,
Yeah.
like a couple
One
of
real estate market.
Yeah, and then a bunch of like natural gas, right?
There you
Like so
go.
it's like you can, you put quantitative easing into those, like you're buying bonds from 5 banks, well, how are they going to get it out? Fucking residential mortgages, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know like what like when you're talking about the deflationary scare at the beginning, right? Like I don't know if it was in response to that or like because there's this big argument around inflation, right? Like I mentioned inflation on Gary Klute's podcast and like on TikTok, all these people are like, you have no fucking clue what you're talking about. I'm like, yeah, I
Don't
don't.
you love
I'm
that,
like,
by the way?
yeah.
You
Well,
put-
the cool part about TikTok is everyone's so much smarter than I am.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Your takes are wildly wrong, no
Yeah.
matter how much
Yeah.
research and thought you
Yeah.
put into it.
Yeah.
There's always that fucking guy that
There's some
pops up.
16-year-old on the other
Yeah.
side who's
You're an idiot.
used to doing this, and now
Yeah.
he's coming after you for inflation.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like I think it's like, were they trying to control for something that was uncontrollable in like the erosion of the global supply chain? Like, I think the biggest problem and the biggest fail when I blame the governments for inflation, like I'm not saying like, oh yeah, Justin Trudeau turned up prices on everything. I'm saying we knew that global supply chains were eroding as a result of COVID, and now China is like, have you seen that
course.
picture with the ships?
Of course.
Fuck.
Terrifying.
yeah.
Terrifying.
So it's like, okay, and they hold 60% of the global grain reserves. Like, and I don't know if you've read Dalio's new book, but like, I fully prescribe to.
Is this Dalio's
Changing World
book?
Order or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah, I have.
Yeah. So like I think that the Chinese economy will hold global reserve currency status within the next century. I believe.
I think you're right. But so let's just touch on that for 1 second. Dude,
Right.
we could fucking go off.
I told you it'd be an hour and a half.
I
man.
love
It's
it,
like-
man. This could be a marathon. I don't
Yeah.
know. But okay, so do you think that the Chinese government is doing this as a way to destroy the West? Is this that type of play?
I think that I think a controlled demolition, like on their, I think they have it within the scope of things that they could do.
Right.
I don't know. Like I'm not. I actually think that like I don't think the West has like I think it's like ideologically and like politically and economically lost,
Okay.
and so it's so easy and vulnerable right now.
Right.
And like I think that I look at like the non-free world, let's call it, like you have the free world, and then
Right.
like and that's where like all of these problems are hitting, and then you have like sort of like those let's say that like the East a lot, and you're seeing a lot of change happening. It would make sense to me. I don't even think that they would be hiding it like that. That's what they want, right? And like they
Right.
have China's doing capitalism better than
In
America,
some
and they're
sense, for sure.
and they're literally only doing it because they think that capitalism is a necessary foundation for true Marxism, right?
Yes, in a sense where the government is capitalistic and the people live under sort of this communistic rule.
Well,
in a
also,
sense.
but like if you read Marxism, it basically says that like in order to establish a proper system of communism, you have to have an extremely strong capitalistic economy prior,
Really?
right? Yeah, it has to be built on the back of that. Basically,
Interesting.
yeah, and
So-
it's like,
so
and that's where there's
essentially-
always like revolution. But originally, there's like, and I think that you look at any like Canada would be one of the countries that like is sort of almost like Scandinavian in the sense that like we've accepted that in order to give people first world,
Yeah.
everybody has to be sort of middle class, or
Right.
we accepted this prior to COVID. There's no exploitation of the well, you can call it like the proletariat and the bourgeoisie if you want to use
Yeah.
like Marxist terms, right? But there's no like exploitation of or disparity of an upper and lower class, and there wasn't in Canada or like Switzerland or like
In the sense where the middle class was a larger part
Right.
of the economy.
yeah, everybody was driving like a C class
Yeah.
or equivalent, right?
Yeah.
Everybody could have that. Everybody could have a house in suburbia,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
like that's what Canada was
Pretty
until
much.
until COVID
I like that you're
started.
saying was because it seems like it's no
Yeah.
longer that.
Well, yeah, I think that I think that in like this COVID and the inflation that happened as a result of it targeted asset holders, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. So where do you see that inflation's come from? Does it have to do with the fact that they've printed a bunch of money in a short period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that supply narrative, like that we
Yeah.
were talking about on real estate. I think that like we're learning right now that you can have record immigration and still have excess demand in your real estate market. There are more people who want to buy houses than there are houses in Canada, right?
Okay.
But now prices are coming down. So we have excess demand and prices are coming down. Well, what does that mean? It means that we should be measuring demand and how much dollars that
Absolutely.
those people have to buy houses.
Mhm.
How many dollars are chasing the houses, not just how many people are chasing the houses.
Absolutely, because I think that's how you would look at any other market, stock market or anything else. It's usually measured in dollar volume. That's the best sort of
Right.
indicator of
Yeah.
the direction
But-
of things.
yeah.
Did you hear that stat that 40% of Canadian homeowners, 40%, by the way, I hope you saw this. I think you probably did a couple weeks ago, came out. So 40% of homeowners own multiple properties.
Yeah.
What else do we know about the housing market? Would you agree that negative carry monthly as an investor is a common thing?
Yeah, I think
market?
Unfortunately, I think it is. Yeah,
Right?
I think there's been a lot of people that saw an opportunity that they'd never been presented before. Right? We've seen a major transition of wealth, and what was the hottest thing? What was everyone's sitting at home watching HGTV and selling Sunset and being like, wow, I should go and invest.
Yeah.
They've got agents that don't know what they're doing, mortgage brokers that don't know what they're doing,
Yeah.
pushing them into deals because everyone's greedy.
Yeah.
We get into these deals in places that we know aren't going to cash flow.
Yeah.
And, it
But
worked
some are happy to
but it
do
worked
that.
for a little bit. Yeah,
And
but some are happy to do it if they can carry it.
Well, no, or because of capital appreciation, right?
So that's
Or
what
if
I'm
you're
saying.
capital appreciation,
So
if
in
you're
a rising market, negative carry is not a terrible thing because spending that $500, $600, or even $1,000.
it's a savings vehicle.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
Leveraged savings
Exactly.
vehicle.
You put out that $6,000 a year, let's say, and ultimately the property value goes up 20, 30%.
2
Makes
years later,
sense.
you're refinancing, you're taking $150,000 out. Does it make sense to pay $12,000 over 2 years for $150,000? Of course it does.
Absolutely.
But when things start going this way and this way, that doesn't make
But
sense
here's
anymore.
the problem. A lot of agents that I'm seeing on TikTok, and obviously that's a great place to look for information, would not agree with what we're saying.
Yeah.
So what's real and what's not?
Well, now it's so funny because now it's
Ignorance is bliss.
now that the
First of all.
market's down, people are like, oh yeah, I was just saying the market always goes up eventually. And it's well, tell that to Japan. Because I actually think when you're talking about global politics, I actually think that Canada is at risk of losing a decade. People
Yes,
don't
they
think,
don't
people don't
understand.
get that, but
Do you
it's
want to just touch on the Japan thing? Because I think a lot
Yeah,
of
sure.
people don't know about it, and I've read about it. I'm so happy you brought that up. And I've seen that sort of parallel. I don't want to go all the way and say we're exactly like that.
we're not we're not even you can't even really compare the two because Japan's a tiny island. Japan has a declining population. There's so many different things. So from a housing perspective, I would say it's not comparable at all. But Japan's stock market just recovered.
From-
I think this was weeks ago. Just
Really?
recovered from its I think it was the 80s. No,
Yeah,
not
like
the 80s.
late 80s, early
Yeah.
90s probably.
Like that. Yeah, yeah.
So
Just so
they've
if you
been
bought the
30
stock,
years.
yeah, man.
Yeah.
And so they
Wow.
lost a whole decade, and a lot of it was a result of so they invented basically this quantitative easing
Yes, they
program,
did.
right? I think or sort of the modern iteration of modern monetary theory. And I think that you have Japan has a very good economy, great quality of life, but no longer globally competitive. Before the China dialogue that we're hearing now was Japan in 70s, 80s, 90s, right?
Mhm.
It was Japan's going to do this, Toyota, this and all that stuff, right? China wasn't even really on the radar at that point. They were still in a huge economic slump, right? I think that mismanagement of the economy, and that happens at a political level. I don't care what anybody says. People are oh, central bank's different from the government. No. Mismanagement of the monetary economy can absolutely decimate a country for a long period of time. I think we have Canada. We basically turned our economy into a housing Ponzi scheme, right?
Oh my God.
25%.
That's a controversial
Yep.
take right there, guys. Don't say
Don't
that.
say Ponzi. scheme.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
we'll edit that out.
Well,
Yeah.
Ponzi actually was a real estate guy. That was the Florida
well,
Charles
he's
Ponzi.
He's also
Wow.
Italian. Why?
Yeah, there you go. God damn
Florida
Italians.
swampland. But no, I think that it's build houses, right?
Yeah.
Have people come in and buy those houses, and they can build more houses, and then and then more people come in, buy the houses, and the value goes up, right? I mean, it's obviously not a direct Ponzi scheme, but that to me isn't a sustainable economy. And again, going back to the China discussion, et cetera. I don't want to touch too much on the geopolitics because it's just I'm not super well versed in it.
Okay.
But basically, our government had 2 years to at least start diversifying the economy, at least start repatriating supply
Are you
chains.
saying that in the sense that our economy is heavily or too heavily dependent on things that surround the microeconomy that real estate would bring
Housing,
in?
yeah.
Housing.
Our economy is way too dependent on housing.
Right. I think I saw a stat, and correct me if I'm wrong, obviously. I think it's 12% of GDP, 13%?
That's direct housing. That's
Literally
yeah,
correct.
yeah.
Closer
That's
to-
so
closer
if
to
you're
a quarter.
but that's before you
Oh,
take
shit.
finance.
Yeah.
That's before you take construction, utilities, infrastructure, right?
So what do you put the whole thing at?
I've seen estimates of 50 to 60%.
Oh my
right? Because
God.
you have to imagine that our entire economy actually does stem from housing. You're
Right.
what you're talking about is residential investment, realtor commissions, and construction. I think, or
Right.
just
More
end
direct. Yeah.
last mile of construction, right? So
Yeah.
this is not considering bricklayers, electricians, all of those other things that are
Or
technically
the supply chain to get to those materials
Right.
for them to get here.
right. So again, like there's really no way to say because our government is very good at manipulating statistics. Again, like this is why I think that it is a political problem. You can say this is a political problem because like you have StatsCan telling everybody that inflation in Canada is 6.8% yesterday, right?
Right.
It's like, yeah, okay. Like try and tell that to somebody who's going to fill up their.
Literally.
I'm actually not going to say gas because then like TikTok, like that's what everybody was.
They're like, no, you don't understand. That's
but okay,
different.
let's talk about food, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a one where okay, if we have issues with food, we need to start domesticating those supply chains. You can build greenhouses. We should have agriculture investment in Canada.
The problem is to start now, and because we've been so dependent, and I hate dependency on all levels, and now we're seeing the downside of what dependency can yield out. It'll probably take, what, a decade to sort of set that up if we wanted to be fully independent in all those ways?
Right. Or had we started in March of 2020, it would take another 8 years.
Okay, so let me run with that for a second. Had we started, fine, we conquered time. Let's say we made some headway infrastructurally or whatever the case is for that. The question is, how do you compete with labor markets abroad that don't have things like unions and people fucking feeling entitled?
You don't.
No one
so
wants
what
to
happens
work.
then?
Well, we're about to find out because the reality is like we've become addicted to cheap goods, right?
Yeah.
Your Walmart, etc. I went to 3 places yesterday to try and find a patio furniture set. They all have I guess they get shipped these like the prototypes from China to put on the floor.
Yeah.
I went to try and buy this set. They're like, yeah, we don't have it.
Really?
Yeah, and apparently this is like everywhere in the world right now. Like we're just kind of just starting to see it. So they're like, yeah, we don't have it. And it's like, okay, cool. Like when are you gonna get there? No, we don't know. I was like, is it gonna be this year? No.
Yeah.
They're like, we actually
Literally
can't tell
zero
you.
idea.
I was like, okay, so you're selling and it's you just went through this with appliances, right? Try and order appliance from Canadian Appliance Source. It's like you buy something, they don't even know if they can sell you that thing. So like our supply chains have eroded so much, and I guess to me it's like that's not something like electronics. I don't think you can domesticate that quickly, right?
Probably
or like
not.
wicker patio furniture,
especially if it's dependent on chips, because we can make the rest of we can build an appliance, but if we don't have the microchip that you need to make the washer and dryer work
There's
for China,
nothing around it.
and trust me, like it's hard enough getting appliances as it is, and then when you get them, literally 30% of them aren't working.
Yeah,
30% of them have issues. That's insane. So
that's a crazy
now
number, by the way.
now you're returning them. Like I've literally spent the last 3 months trying to get new microwave, new dishwasher, new washer dryer.
Shit.
So all brand new, and this is CAS telling me this is Best Buy. This is
have you not been
General
through this?
Electric?
Not recently, no.
Crazy.
Yeah, no. I've heard
we're doing a flip right now. I got to order appliances like later today. I'm fucking scared.
Dude,
I don't even want to do it.
Crazy. I mean, the only way that I could see that a solution might be able to happen here, it's not going to end good anyways.
No.
It's not going to help us. But I think the only way we can bring some sort of independence back to the country, in terms of manufacturing and stuff like that, would have to happen through automation. Which is a double-edged sword, right? That's the only way at this point we can actually compete. We're not competing on labor costs.
But this is interesting, right? Because again, like we have a government that's trying to control inflation, right?
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau now all of a sudden is talking about it yesterday for the first time ever.
Wow.
I mean, forgive him if he doesn't think about monetary policy. But innovation is deflationary. We know this, right? So it's like why? But again, we knew that. Like I think everybody at this table knew that inflation was going to be a problem this time last year.
100%.
Like you could see it, you could feel it. And everybody else in the world, like at least in like the world I think that we operate in, where we see this stuff on Twitter, social media, etc., was already having that conversation.
Absolutely.
I think that like the transitory inflation conversation kind of went away like this time last year.
Well, if you remember, like so transitory I think came second. First they were saying MMT, like modern monetary theory, was fine. Helicopter money's fine. We're not going to have inflation. Things are different this time. Of course they're not different. This isn't anything new. It's like coin clipping from back in the day to everything else. But touching on inflation, here's my concern. So, and again, it's a take, which means it's an opinion. Doesn't mean I'm 100% right. I'm just like you. I try to study and do my best.
We'll let the comments figure it out.
Yeah, please don't roast us. But I think this is an issue too that's not really being spoken of. And I think that the reason, and I'm a guy that's a big proponent of too big to fail. Like we said, the housing market is 40% of GDP in its entirety. Like we're assuming. But this time could be different. And I say that because, okay, at the same time, you had this Russia-Ukraine thing happen.
Right.
The Americans decide to weaponize money. And weaponizing money, they scare the shit out of their own friends, right? Kicking them off SWIFT, stuff like that. Pretty much, it's like working at a company. You're not getting along with your boss, but you guys are okay, whatever. He now pulls out a gun and shoots your colleague in front of you, literally in the head, right in front of you. And you're like looking at this and you're like, what the fuck just,
Yeah.
you know, you're
Do
like,
I
what?
still want to work here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I get we're good right
Yeah.
now. Like I delivered the report.
I'm
at the
making money.
deadline.
This is okay. But
Yeah, this is
you
okay.
just-
But he literally just blasted this
Yeah.
guy, right? So they're probably starting to think, and you see,
Was it up to the U.S. to like make that decision? Like the
yeah,
SWIFT
this is
thing?
part of their
So-
sanctions. Yeah, so this is something we haven't seen before, and this is where, and again, we'll get into this a little bit later. Maybe you guys want to talk about it, but like Bitcoin specifically, stuff like that,
Yeah.
central banks, all that shit. But because they've done that, what you're seeing now with the petrodollar. So for people watching, let's just go to the beginning. You know, once upon a time, the U.S. dollar used to be linked to gold. I just kind of learned this at depth recently. It was kind of interesting.
I've watched your stuff on this.
Have
It's
you?
great. Yeah.
Yeah, so like to me, this is mind blowing, and I think people need to understand the mechanics of how this shit works.
So we're
But
talking about going back to the gold standard.
Pretty
when
much.
things changed there.
yeah, so I mean, you had the Fed come out. You know,
Yeah.
we were still linked to gold in some sense. We were on this whole 1-to-1. Nixon, 1971, delinks it completely. 1973, the Americans, you know, start exploiting resources in the Middle East, and they start discovering there's oil under the ground. But of course, you know, those countries didn't have the money or ability to sort of create the infrastructure needed for the purpose of extracting it. So the Americans look at this as a winning opportunity. They come in, they're like, hey, no problem. We'll spend the funds. We'll build out your infrastructure. We have the ability to do it. Here's the deal, though. They're delinked from gold. They need something else. You have to buy all oil in U.S. dollars, right? So this is the birth of the petrodollar, in essence.
So from gold to oil.
But now
gold to
isn't yeah, and I mean Canada was supposed to be a petrocurrency, but now we're decoupling from
I
that.
saw
right?
that, which is terrifying too. Which I don't understand how that's happening. per
I
se.
think that because we aren't really in control of, let's say, like the exchange valuation of our
Right,
dollar. So
right.
the global capital markets are saying, yeah, well, they're calling our bluff. They're saying,
Yeah.
yeah, Canada's economy actually isn't
Yeah,
a
isn't that
petro
anymore.
economy. It's
Yeah.
a housing economy.
Pretty
Well, I
much.
guess they're not saying explicitly that it's a housing economy,
but they're
but
sort of suggesting. it
that's
is.
why, like,
So
I've
are we
talked to
going to
a lot
link
of
our dollar to
guys.
duplexes, or what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I've actually talked to a lot of guys who are trying to do like you know the Great White Short, the
Really?
shorting the Canadian housing market. Yeah, like a lot of them like kind of reach out to me on like Twitter and shit
You've
like
been
that.
talking to Marco Hodes, right?
Yeah, a little bit about
Okay.
he.
You gotta get him.
Yeah, so hopefully he'll be
Like
doing.
ASAP.
I have like a little bit just on Twitter, but Ben's hopefully gonna get him for
That would be dope.
the next Bank of Canada episode. Yeah,
That
so
would be
I guess
wild.
that's June 2nd or 3rd.
Second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thursday is the 2nd. Yeah.
So I just want to take it back for a second.
Yeah.
By the
Yeah,
way,
sorry.
sorry, I know we went off, and again, I love
That'll
this shit.
happen.
We could fucking rant,
Yeah.
and it's all good. But 1973, petrodollar's born, right? 2022, weaponization of money. That whole like, I just saw my employer shoot a colleague. So you have countries like India that were friendly, quote unquote. Other guys that you know were pretty much like on America's side in some sense, or at
Mhm.
minimum neutral to on their side.
Mhm.
They're now sort of finding workarounds. There's guys in the EU, countries in the EU, that are now opting to pay for oil in rubles. So
Yeah.
you're losing demand
Yeah, like
for
the
the
yuan,
US dollar.
right? Like there was a
Yes.
couple of big deals between
Yes.
China and Iran, I believe.
The
right?
Saudis and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So now you're seeing demand slip for the US dollar
And they're using but it is interesting because like U.S. dollar still seems to be like remarkably strong
at the
right?
moment. But I
But
think
the
that's
ruble's now strong again as well, which
Exactly.
is fucking wild. Because remember,
that bounce
2 months
back,
ago,
50% crash.
the ruble, if,
Yeah.
like even more than that, it's something
Yeah.
like you couldn't take money out. It was
Yeah.
literally a mass. Like I mean,
Mass.
people were going to the ATM, they couldn't
Yeah.
take any money
And-
out.
and there's
Ruble, you
still-
couldn't even get rubles on any open market in the world. And now,
I mean, here in the West, right, because of the sanctions, but internally, and I applaud them for this, not because I support what's going on. I don't even want to get into all that stuff, but more so in in terms of if we're going to look at this as a chess game, they're fucking winning. They are
That's
playing
it,
this
and,
so
like,
well.
Yeah.
So that's how I would have curtailed that discussion that we started about China. It's like I don't know if they're trying to, but if they're doing it, one, they're winning, and
Yeah.
two, they can win. Like that's how I feel about it, right? Like I think that like I think that these economies now are watching the West just burn themselves to
Oh,
the ground.
100% in
And
so
we're
many
like
ways.
and like they don't even really have to do anything. 'Cause
Why
we're
are
just
the
gonna do it
leaders not
ourselves.
understanding? Like you mentioned earlier, the whole that image of the ships being stuck at
Yeah.
port, and it's obvious already.
Because I actually think that like
Is there a
There-
virus that is that dangerous? There's no way.
I don't even know if like you tie it to COVID. Like I just think that like the thing is that if that was like the knowledge, it's the same as like modern monetary theory as
Yeah.
well. Like if the average American or Canadian knew how that worked, like if you knew that you were when you're buying a house and you're paying your mortgage, you're actually creating Canadian dollars
Yes.
for the bank.
Yep.
Like because basically central bank lends to chartered bank lends to you. That money never existed. As you fulfill your mortgage, you're actually bringing those dollars into existence. So you're taking them out of the employment economy, paying them back to the bank who's paying them back to the central bank.
what is
Yeah.
that called again? Ponzi?
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
it's like-
exactly.
So to me, it's like, but if the average Canadian really got that, I think that you would already have like this massive distrust in your government. And this is where you're like starting to see these authoritarian governments like where they're succeeding because you need that shit in this type of world, right? And I think that there's a degree of like there's a fear between the political world and the consumer, and you start to see it like with the radicalization of the right, but also the radicalization of the left. Like these people are like this shit is getting like
very divisive,
but also like crazy, like because people are actually like their life it feels like a life and death situation for a lot of people,
dying on
right?
swords
And so
left and right.
So now you go this Walmart phenomenon or this patio furniture phenomenon that I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
that's a big item. Now you say all of a sudden clothing, right? And these things, it's not like I don't even know. I think inflation is probably like partially behind us. The next thing is going to be shortage, like actually, like and so the agricultural economist from what school is it in Halifax? There, Dalhousie. Like he basically argued like outright with StatsCan because they were like, oh yeah, food's up like 8% or something. And he's like, food inflation is literally like 50%.
You know what's interesting about that though? So the Fed, I know that the Canadian government or StatsCan came out yesterday. I think we went from 6.7 to 6.9. I want to say we
was
went
8.
6.8,
but it was 5 something, 5.6 to 6.8.
No, I know it was 5.9, and then went up. It went into the 6s.
6.8 yesterday.
Yeah,
really. Okay, so look at the U.S. I think they announced 8.3.
Yeah,
right, and it came down from 8.5.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many things they excluded for that?
This is the truth. So that was like,
and it just barely did anything.
Yeah. And this is where I think that the government does have a degree of responsibility in the inflation conversation, right? It's like that Statistics Canada is a government agency, right? So like, and these are the people who are telling us about inflation, right? Like they're guiding the average consumer. And if you look at, it's really interesting. Just if you go on the Wikipedia page for the early 90s recession in Canada, I think the reason that there's like the central bank director in that time basically said that Canadians have a higher inflation psychology, they were saying, than Americans.
Meaning
so,
what? What do you mean by that?
Higher propensity to spend fast in anticipation that their dollars will lose buying power. Right.
Okay. Would you say that that's somewhat correlated, by the way, and sorry to interrupt, we'll pull that back, but do you think that's in, like, because I'm watching the bond market as well.
Right.
And you're seeing bonds sort of take a dive, and they have been for the last little bit. And normally, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think bonds are usually the best risk-off investment you can make.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Theoretically. So if now we're living in a scenario where even bonds are falling,
right? What
the hell is that saying? Because bonds basically, I would say if bonds are falling, that's bearish for the currency, correct?
Yeah, I mean that's probably beyond my scope, but I know like the Canada 5 was surging a little bit, and now you're just starting to see mortgage rates adapt to that environment. Right? I think BMO's the only one left who hasn't. But they I think Canada 5 went to 2.9, and then it's kind of like somewhere between 2.7 and 2. Somewhere like trading between 2.7, 2.9.
Yeah.
And then I guess the US 10 is sort of what you'd use for your inflation indicator. Yeah, I mean they're coming off, but like I feel like it's kind of one of those sinusoidal, like you know what I mean? Like there's a bounce, like it's a pendulum swing, right? Like I think they peak, blow off,
Yeah.
and so I don't know if we're going to start seeing higher highs and higher lows on that.
What do you think's going to happen here? And I know, and again, we're just shooting shit. We're just curious. It's one of those types of conversation. Obviously, you know, we're doing our best with what we see. What do you think happens here long term
in Canada?
Yeah.
I think that we are going to see almost like a jockeying for political power of a secondary ally beyond the United States, based on a lot of the things that we like a new trade partner. Like obviously, it's easy to trade with the United States because they're close, right?
Of course.
But you know, like China buys a lot of real estate here. Not China, but Chinese foreign direct investment. We're seeing a lot of Indian foreign direct investment. We're seeing a lot of Indian immigration. Right. Same thing with Iranian capital coming to Canada. You know, in the 90s and early 2000s. We have ties with a lot of the countries right now that are falling, let's say, or exploring different options from allyship around, you know, the North American, like I guess political unions, but also trade unions, right? And these are all countries that are sort of establishing their own foothold in the global economy and massive populations as well. I think that the most likely outcome is we start to see countries like that come here and say, yeah, like, look, you guys are resource rich. You got to diversify your economy.
Right.
Uncle Sam's not going to be the only guy standing at the door with cash being like, hey, you guys heard of lithium mining or you guys heard of nickel or whatever, you know, like, and I think that there's a a big reset, and it'll almost be like a reglobalization that'll happen as a result of it. And I actually believe that Canada could play a big role in that if we are politically positioned well to do that. And that requires, from my perspective, diversification of the economy at the onset.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Especially given the fact, like you said, the GDP is really, a lot of it at least, is real estate related, or it's a fire-based economy, like financial, insurance, like real estate.
Which is crazy because, again, we're one of the most naturally resource,
great
right?
point.
Like we've got
Second
fresh
most resource rich
we've got
in the
fresh
world.
water, we've got all like the
lumber.
Not only just lumber and water, but gas, oil.
Yeah.
And you have like this, I don't know if you heard of like the lifeboat Britain concept, but basically like close proximity to, I don't know if it's like a 20, whatever parallel our borders on, is it 28th? I don't know. But basically like, you'll start to see desertification, like if, along global warming, desertification around the equator, right? So like no more farmland, like viable farmland.
And like
in those
Brazil,
areas.
for instance, kind of.
Yeah, like anywhere basically close to the equator, like deserts will expand. So like the U.S., sub-Saharan Africa, et cetera. And then that'll push like viability of farmland. It'll unlock almost farmland in places like Canada, right, Russia, et cetera. Yeah, so I mean, like again, like these are all just like theories. Like I don't. But I just like try and read a lot of stuff about this stuff because like I buy real estate with like a 100-year outlook, not like a 25 or a 5-year, or like it's not like I'm flipping it at the end of my mortgage term.
Right, you're looking to sort of add to a portfolio long term, and
So-
really probably operating on seeking intrinsic value more than you are appreciative potential, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Is your play?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But going back to here's what I'm trying to really find out, and I'm gonna throw it out there. And I think a lot of people probably think that this is a bad take, but fuck it. I believe this. I really do believe that when you have extreme situations sort of unfolding, like you've got inflation happening at a crazy rate right now. Inflation obviously is really a battle between demand and supply, and a mismatch in that category.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Because I'm seeing, and again, I don't know if this is 100% true, but from what I'm reading, I'm seeing the outlier sort of goods that consumers would buy that were doing really well. So, for example, Rolexes, used cars, coming off.
Yeah, negative wealth effect.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's happening. Is there a possibility they overshoot rate hikes, and then eventually from this, we see a massive pendulum swing to deflation? In your opinion, do you think that could happen?
Let me start this one off
Yes.
because I'm probably the most ignorant one at this table
Right,
for
right.
this.
Come on.
So I've got
But you've got the mustache.
I've got a bit more of an optimistic like outlook for this.
Okay.
The reading and the research I've done is my short answer would be yes.
Really?
Everything's cyclical, right? Look at mortgage rates, look at inflation, look at the recessions, right? We go like this, the shit gets fucked up. We see the remedies and the things put in place to combat those things, and then 1, 3, 5 years later we're back to where we started. We've even said the Bank of Canada only raises rates to lower them years later, right?
Yes.
So in a short answer, yes, but I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say about that, because again, I have a very not very, but a bit more of a bullish outlook overall.
Yeah,
I'm
which
sitting
it
with two
can
big
be.
bears right now, but
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're bears. I mean, I think we're just realists, because if you really put everything on the table,
and
I'm
so
probably-
am I,
I'm
and
probably
so am I,
pretty
and I see, and trust me, I spent enough time listening and talking to you, and listening and talking to you that I fully see all that. But I look at real estate in the same way that Dan does. Like, I don't look at it, and obviously we're doing a flip right now, so that's a bad example. But all the other stuff I buy and all the stuff I'm planning to buy, that's a hold for
Long term.
that's a hold forever if I can, right? That's a refinance hold, and so on and so forth. So I think it's all about the outlook that people have for these. We've commoditized real estate. How do we undo that? Can we undo
It's
that?
happening right now.
I
in
don't
front of
think
our
so.
eyes.
I don't think we can, to be completely honest. And I think that I think the fact that they pumped the economy with so much money supply the last 2 years, I
Fake
think I read a
money.
stat.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fake money. And the problem is that money has to go somewhere. Money's always moving. Even as we speak right now, the question is, where is it going? It's not leaving the system once it gets in, as far as I understand. And so this kind of goes back to, I think, 2020, when you saw stuff like GME and AMC, like stonks.
I was just going to say
Right?
all the meme stocks and the
All the
cryptos,
meme
right? Look what
stocks.
happened with Luna, like earlier
That's
this
a
week,
different
right?
situation, though.
It is, but I think that's where a lot of that fake money went,
Yes.
right? All that fake
Yeah,
money.
yeah.
Everyone's sitting at home watching TV, getting
Well, yeah.
$1,200 a week for doing absolutely
Yeah.
nothing. What do I do with this?
Does
I
it
buy
make
GameStop.
sense to
I buy,
work? Right?
exactly. And we've seen a lot of that money disappear.
Yeah.
right? We've seen trillions of dollars wiped out in the last couple of weeks alone.
Absolutely, tons more than, I think you posted this, and I
More
liked it.
than,
more than what, the global financial crisis
Yeah.
has come
Yeah.
off,
Yeah.
and it's only been what, like 4 months in
Yeah.
terms of how
Yeah.
they calculated that.
Terrifying.
Yeah, and we're just getting warmed up, I think. And
So,
But is that less terrifying because we know that a large portion of that money was essentially faked? Like, does that have an impact on it, or what's your take on that?
No, I think that there's a couple of different things, right? So number one is like there's modern monetary theory, if executed properly, eventually requires severe taxation, right, to bring that money, to take that money back into the economy. But the challenge is that taxation is also inflationary, so you can't build, or you can't wait. We can't wait to tax, or sorry, we have to wait to tax. They can't implement the tax. So basically, modern monetary theory imposes that you put a bunch of money out into the economy, it circulates, it earns a yield on itself, it pumps up the economy, and then you take it back out through tax, right? So, that's
simple,
a
beautiful,
oversimplification.
but hey,
well
that's good.
But so now we have all this money that's left in the economy. The challenge is that our economy is built in such a way that there's tiers to it, right? And so if you hold an asset, housing in Canada would be a great example, it gives you the opportunity to hoard that capital, because that's a place where, again, you have dollars chasing an asset, the asset inflates in value. Now all of a sudden, if I sold a place in February of this year, now I've just taken that money out, and it's that can sit in my pocket as long as it needs to. And so you're basically creating this disparity by increasing capital hoarding on the wealth side, right? So you're inflating wealth through assets. A couple of different phenomena that happened as a result of this. Canadians are sitting on record levels of savings. I think is it 300 million?
So yes, but here's the thing. I just saw a stat posted. That trend's been broken a couple months ago,
Right.
and they're quickly tapping into credit again.
Right.
They depleted through those savings.
Right. So
that's interesting.
But so you would make the assumption that as we start to deploy into record savings, if that exists or doesn't, that's going to continue to be inflationary, right? Because more dollars chasing good. We have other phenomena like global supply chain erosion that is inflationary, right? So I don't think, to me, this is, if we execute this right, and if the Western world wants to try and keep some semblance of global superiority in economics and innovation, et cetera, the deflationary cycle has to be led by innovation. I don't think that there's a way, and that could be financial innovation, right?
Yeah.
It could mean like when you're talking about crypto, et cetera, which and it could be a decent pivot to that.
Could be.
It could be automation in bringing down costs for goods that we need to repatriate back into the North American economy.
That though affects us because the labor market's going to be impaired by something like that.
Right. But and then absolutely it will be. But an impaired labor market can also be deflationary, right? Like the reality is that like I think that there's an inevitable amount of pain as a result of what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
It's how do we kill the fewest people, right?
Like sort of how do they orchestrate a soft landing in essence? Is that even possible?
I don't even know if it's a soft landing. I think it's like how do you impact the least amount of people?
Right.
Or how do you do the least bad? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, like I'm not the one in that position, but I think housing is a very good example where we've literally we just watched the average Canadian homeowner lose $300,000 in 2 months.
So
but we also watched them make $500,000 over the last 2
So a
years.
lot
So
of
are they
people-
still up that 200?
They're up on paper, but
Exactly.
and again, I want to bring this up just because I have a mortgage background like you, so I see it from the financial side, and it's very good that you guys brought that up. A lot of people typically point to the fact that we're only down, we're back to January, we're back to February in terms of average price, I believe, give or take.
Actually, Uxbridge is down year over year. Did you see that stat?
No, I didn't. Holy shit, year over year, fully.
2 markets in the GTA are down year over year.
Were they a top market in the boom?
Yeah, they were among.
There you go.
And
So the bigger the boom, the bigger the
Innisfil is
bust.
down
Really?
year over year.
Oh,
yeah,
shit.
May to May.
I felt Uxbridge would have been insulated on that's where my parents live.
Yeah, so of course, yeah.
I was hoping. But the thing about, my parents bought their house for...
May stats are going to shock people. No
I
joke.
think so.
There's going to be a couple year over year down.
I don't think people are going to be able to sort of avoid that, but here's my concern. Okay, so first of all, and I'm sure you guys would agree, anytime a hike happens, it definitely means that hike has to work its way through the market. It takes time.
Yeah.
So we're still in that sort of trying to see where that falling knife is going to land.
Yeah.
But there's a financial component to this. So if you lift the hood and you just pull away those stats for a second, you got to understand, for example, private mortgages, and we've talked this off camera and stuff like that, or any bank deals and stuff, you got to remember when they were there's a big portfolio mismatch right now happening for lenders. For example, you've got inflation that's a lot higher than it was a year ago. That's when a lot of these deals were originated. They're coming up for maturity at some point soon. So the cost of funding for the lender has gone up. The risk has gone up significantly. If you were a private lender a year ago, it's the safest bet to make. Why? The day I lend out the money, the day after, I'm in a safer position.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
The asset I've collateralized and lent against has gone up in value. So back then, it was great. Today, take an example. I've got lenders now that are probably, again, the private guys, this is like the individual operating off a home equity line of credit.
Yep.
Cost of funding is in and around 4%. they have to raise rates at minimum to cover the spread of inflation. So that way it could actually make sense for them to lend. At the same time now, I had a guy call me. I was starting to tell you this off camera before we started, but I had a guy call me. He gets into, and this speaks to real estate and all this crazy shit that's going on. So he calls me. He contracted for a property back in December or January. Okay. So his realtor, and I'm not blaming realtors specifically broadly, but there are some bad apples.
There's a
out
lot
there.
of bad
A
apples.
lot of
A
bad
lot of
apples.
bad
Let's say,
apples.
let's say like
Fuck them all.
75% of them are
Wow, that's
door openers.
I would say
Yeah.
higher, but yeah.
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be
Oof.
nice.
Yeah, we are. Oof, that's a big
Yeah.
number. But
Do better out there, realtors.
I would hope so.
Do
And it's
better.
time to do that because a
Yeah.
lot of them are going to get some shit right now in the coming
Oh, it's
months.
about to get
Well,
yeah,
I
it's
thi-
going to get
just-
decimated. This quarter's worth of closings dry
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
like there's no, like the market is like close to no bid right now.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty
I'll
close.
be honest, like, so I am seeing some bids, but
Yeah.
it definitely depends. It's the good properties that are going. And
Beauty
again,
pageant.
yeah.
Exactly, beauty pageant. I think did you post that? I think I
Yeah.
saw that.
CBC quoted me on. I didn't invent that, by the way. I don't know
no?
who said it. I got it
That
from
was a good
somebody on Twitter, but yeah, it's not. I think
It's okay.
Peter K. You know, I
think
don't know
so.
how his Greek last name. So Kyriazopoulos, maybe
Just
something like that.
It's a good quote, but that's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm seeing as well. But here's the thing, just to go back to the story. So this guy contracts in I think December, January, pretty much at the peak, right? His realtor gets him to bid to the max. So I think the list price was like 9. He ends up bidding it to like 1.1. I won't give into like too many details, but long story short, realtor says, "Don't worry, you're pre-approved, you're all good," stuff like that.
The last minute second.
Yes, bait and
Yeah,
switched
man.
into a private. Here's what I
Bad.
hated about this story, though, is that the guy had some issues with the banks that, like if you run a file through the bank, you'll find out very quickly whether it's a yay or nay. So meaning, at the point that he submitted that offer firm, of course, they didn't even bother submitting his information to a bank. She basically said she said it's firm without checking. In other words, right?
Mhm.
Don't do that, mortgage brokers.
Yeah, do not
Don't
do that.
out there.
It gets better, guys. So that happens. So now all of a sudden he thought he's getting bank money. Turns out he's getting private money. The fees are astronomical.
And a lot of guys were doing this predatorily. Is that what you're telling
I don't
me is
know if it
happening?
was, like-
because that shit was like a lot of.
I-
you're hearing
I
a
believe
lot
so.
of
And I
stories
don't know
where
what's
guys
better,
are like,
predatory or ignorance. They're
yeah, the
both
guys are like,
Doesn't
you
even
gotta
matter.
rush.
Yeah.
Don't even get a qualification.
Yeah.
We'll get you the money,
We'll
and then at the
figure it
last
out.
second, they're like, "Oh, deal can't close," and they'll get
and they'll get a private.
And
Here's
at
the
that
thing:
point, you're
rescue
already-
capital is drying up, though, right?
Exactly
Yeah.
for that reason that I was
So
saying.
you start to see this like top down.
Yes, a contraction of credit.
Yeah.
Right? That's usually how this type of cycle starts to play out. But watch this. So he bids on it, he gets it, whatever. Now, obviously, she does the switch on him, purposely or not. I can't say for sure. I don't know. But I do think that she did because obviously she would have found out very early into the whole process that the guy was not bankable.
We know how that works.
Right?
You
2
keep- yeah,
seconds. You
yeah.
could find out. So he ends up getting a private. I think it's like at 6.5% for the first, interest only, mind you. He gets a lender fee of 3.5%, which is fine. Like that kind of could be the scenario.
It
He-
still happens every day if the deal's good.
Right.
Yeah.
And he puts 25% down. No problem. She tells him, "Don't worry, we'll refinance you at a bank." So he's 75% loan to value. Remember, he put 25% down.
yeah.
The best part is she connected him to the mortgage broker, the realtor. She also gets him, this is the fucked up part, to pay a $10,000 fee to her in addition to the commission that she got for the real estate just for making the connection to the mortgage guy. Yeah. Okay. After bait and switching him. Now she said, "Don't worry, close, everything's good. You're gonna refinance in 3 months." Again, like I know in the private space, 80, 85 is fine, more or less. He went in at 75, meaning he put that 25% down. What's happened since? He closed in March. At this point now, he's pretty much north of 80%, right? He cannot go to a bank. Why? Because banks only refinance to 80. He's now been pushed from 75 where he started, and he's now at like 83 to 85. Therefore, there's no escape for him. And there's a lot of these deals out there and a lot of this stuff happening. And so even though they're stuck there, it's not going to get better at maturity. It's going to get worse because you have lender mismatches. Like you said, credit's contracting on their end. They have to make
Renewal
a bigger spread.
shock.
There's going to be renewal shocks.
Well, and you have a declining price environment too, right?
Yeah.
So like I think in the Big Short, the book, it mentions that like it really only took like 5 to 7% of the market to be bad for it to become systemic. Canada's probably, I don't think like our banking system is too big to fail because
You don't think so?
no, I mean I don't think it's too big, but I think it's too diversified to fail, right? Like
Okay.
because I think it's only like 10%.
So
of
you're
the books,
suggesting
right?
that it can't fail because it's got too many other products that they're making money with.
Right. But
Okay.
so but that's not to say that like I don't even know if the banking system is the issue, right? Like yeah, we're not going to see a Lehman Brothers like collapse in Canada, right? But like I think what you see like is, and it goes back to that Japan thing. It's like our economy will get decimated as a result of a contraction of
Oh,
even
absolutely.
if GDP was only 12% housing. If you contract that entire economy,
Yeah.
like right now you've got trades striking
Yeah.
against bouncing input costs on the hard cost side, so like lumber, etc.
Yeah.
There's so many elements of the housing supply chain that are just getting absolutely fucked right now.
And all these elements, by the way, and correct me if I'm wrong, you would say are adding inflationary pressure.
Well,
meantime.
yeah, I would
Okay.
say so, right? But this is the challenge, and this is where eventually you just get like developers are just gonna be like, no, I'm not building. I'm not gonna build.
Right.
Because prices are going down, houses are going up. Eventually, like, is there an equilibrium to be found down the road as we start to see supply contraction?
But if supply contracts, then that makes the argument that creates a stickier downside for values to
Right,
really come off.
you would
right?
say that, but I think that now what we are learning is that it doesn't actually, excess demand actually doesn't matter, and I think one of the
Okay.
reasons it doesn't matter is the number of houses being demanded by people, right? So again, everybody uses the immigration argument. More people want to buy Canadian houses
Right.
than there is houses.
Right.
Yeah, that works if all of those people have record amounts of money, right?
Right,
Then
exactly.
prices will
Yeah.
continue to go up. But now they don't, and now their buying power is being reduced, and the domestic buying power is being reduced, and we're seeing, like, Canadians have houses that are, I think it was like the most recent census data. The growth in two fastest growth in household sizes was 5+ and 1,
Okay.
right? So you're talking about mismatch. We have like also this thing where basically you're seeing new household formation is non-couples and not people not starting families. So these tiny condo, let's say,
Yeah.
and
5.
then basically a rooming house, right?
Wow.
Because you're starting to see like DIY density on immigration. A lot of people like bringing family over, and then builders are building houses now that they're like, it's a 4-bedroom. Every bedroom has an ensuite. There's its own electrical circuit,
so it's
two
almost
electrical
already
circuits. You can have a hot plate. But man, like you go to any of these brand new subdivisions like Brampton, East Gwillimbury, any of these things where you're seeing these like 3,000 square foot walkout basement like
Yeah.
McMansions, 4 cars in the driveway, right?
Minimum.
Really?
Yeah.
Cars parked all along the street.
Do you think we're going to see sort of more multi-generational
You have to.
ownership?
That's what that census data is
That's what
alluding
I'm
to.
thinking too.
That's what and so, but this to me just points to a lot. Nobody really thinks about the Canadian housing economy as when you look at the Western world, it's like there's a cyclicality and immigration cyclicality that happens, right? And like you could say Germany in the 60s as an example,
Yeah.
right? Or anywhere in Europe in the 60s, right? 70s, et cetera, like where you're getting a lot of migration from Middle East, Africa, et cetera, to grow the economy out of crises, right?
Right.
Canada is going through the same shit right now, and it's not a forever opportunity, right? Like that's why we're rushing to do it. Get people here while they still want to come.
The question is the quality of people that we're getting. Are these people that are coming to buy homes, or are these people that are sort of not
Well,
those
look,
kinds
tough
of
to
look what's
say. I
happened,
mean-
look what's happened with rent, right? Rent is literally skyrocketing because people are coming. They can't get qualified. And again, you know it just as well as I do that a new immigrant, like that's a hard person to place, right? If you don't have 2 years of work history,
Yes.
No,
where's
don't they?
where's
Isn't
your
there
money coming-
waivers with
They,
like
they,
certain
they have
immigration
programs, but again, like remember, it's
Those
hard.
are drying up too. I forgot.
That's what I mean. It's,
Yeah.
it's
I
just
know-
harder.
Not
It's harder
easy.
to place
Just
those
getting
kind
harder.
of people. Exactly.
So yeah, so like I would say I don't know if it's hard to say. Like there's the CRS score that cliffed off
Yeah.
when they increased their immigration numbers from 320 to 400, and that was like basically the economic. Like I don't want to use the term good because like it's not up to like and I know like most people wouldn't, but like it's the economic viability because we also have to think about like are we setting these people up for failure when we're inviting them here, right? Because like
I would argue in some sense. Well, I'm not going to
Hey,
argue.
come
and
be
say
homeless
that.
in Canada.
Yeah,
Is that
like,
what the
where,
thing is?
Where
Is that the slogan?
is the value proposition in
Yeah.
a sense?
Right.
Like, okay, we have healthcare. Okay, we have
Do we though?
like not great healthcare.
well,
no.
so this is actually a really interesting one, and I don't know much about this stuff, but like I just think that if you look at the current state of our healthcare system, like we were one of the only countries that still had to lock down multiple times because of ICU capacity.
Yes.
If this is like, it's not just that's our healthcare system. That is our healthcare system with 10 million baby boomers approaching
Yeah.
old age.
What the fuck is going to happen in
Right.
the next 5-10 years?
So to
when
me, it's
mom
like
and dad
I don't
are-
think that like I actually think that Canada might do like if we can weather this current recession, I think we'll be like okay for 5 years. I actually like to me the long term out. This is when I talk about the Japan shit. It's like I don't like unless we get extremely smart about our economy and diversifying our economy and growing our economy beyond immigration and housing and things like that, because like those are great. You're growing the amount of people contributing to the economy, but your GDP per capita is cliffing. Like it's literally,
Right.
and immigration has that impact. And it's not because immigrants are less productive. If anything, they're more productive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the reality is you're taking the same economy and bringing more people into it. We need to,
Right.
with the economy and the amount of people in the economy need to grow simultaneously. And there's been no effort to grow the economy as a result of,
That's a great point.
right?
Yeah.
And like
that's a
there
great
are
point.
opportunities. Like it's like, okay, we know that global supply chains are eroding. We know that we're about, and now you have economists saying your agricultural world, like food supply is going to be absolutely fucked.
Disaster.
We've seen all the stuff with
right?
wheat. It's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, it is
Right.
scary.
So, but you look at like Russia produces a shit ton of wheat,
Ukraine.
right?
Ukraine
Ukraine,
too.
China holds
Yeah.
60% of the world's global
this
grain
is
supply.
why I
India,
brought-
India just
but-
said they're not exporting any more food.
They stopped.
Yeah.
They banned export of
So,
grain.
I mean,
So
guys, I gotta say this. I don't give a fuck. Label me a conspiratorial person. I don't care. I look at stats.
Yeah.
I look at shit. I
Yeah.
try to put shit together. This is my feeling on what's to come. So I kind of brought up the whole point of deflation earlier. And the reason I say that is two things. One, I do think they're going to overshoot on hikes because demand has already fallen. My argument is inflation is being sustained by the fact that it's a supply chain issue. I think it's being done on purpose by China. I'm going to fucking say it. I don't care.
no, I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that. Like,
I just
it's not like,
I don't know why it's something that's not being spoken
but people
of.
like, well, I
why?
think because I think like there's like this idea that there's like fear around anti-China sentiment, but the reality is that's
shouldn't
not.
be.
But that's not anti-China sentiment.
No,
You're basically
that's
saying
fact.
no, but it's not even anti. Like you're basically saying they're smart enough to be doing this.
Yeah,
like if
yeah.
anything,
Oh,
it's
they're
pro.
winning.
Why aren't
You're
we
like,
doing what they're
not,
doing?
But or it's not even that. It's like hey, like you're acknowledging that what they're doing is winning. Like you know what I mean?
But
Like,
here's my point. Like,
yeah.
what happens? Because like supply's constrained. So imagine this: if they're really these master chess players, what's the next move? A supply shock. They're
Right.
gonna fucking unload.
Flood.
When demand is
It's interesting.
crippled,
Right.
then you have deflation.
Right.
That's my theory.
So let me jump in here for a second because I want to know what you guys think. So we on the China aspect, we've seen Evergrande in the last
Yes, love that you
year and a
brought that up.
half.
Yeah.
That's
And it's spreading.
that totally fucked everything up.
Yeah.
We saw the housing crisis.
Their rates are going down
We've
now,
seen,
too.
and then we've seen COVID reappear in China and
Yes.
then react the same way they did 2 years ago,
Yes.
extremely intensely. And then we just saw the Bank of China cut rates again drastically. What, last week, 2 weeks ago?
Did they just cut recently?
Yeah, a couple
Yeah.
days ago. Yeah.
Really?
Or sorry, was it? Yeah, just a couple days. So
But
what,
okay,
what does
let
that
me
mean?
just
Where
add
does
a
that
cliff
go?
note to that point. So just remember, our scenario here economically is slightly different from an inflationary standpoint. They have a
Right.
very low rate of inflation.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I think it's like 2%.
Yeah, because they
True.
can. Well, most
True.
of those economies over there aren't suffering from this because they don't depend on other countries'
don't-
supply chains.
Yeah, and
Right?
they-
Like,
yeah.
Because they're the producers in essence, or
Yeah.
supply providers, right? So,
Well, again, my appliances are going to get fucked up if I don't have the one piece I need from China, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Canadians aren't
Absolutely.
making them. Americans aren't making them. We're
So,
not-
but durable goods are interesting, right? Because they're durable goods. To me, it's like, let's say we can't solve that problem. Then it's like, okay, well, do you really need the new fucking fridge? Do you really need the new stove? Blah, 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 right? Like, there's enough that you could go to a scrapyard and find a working stove. Like, those things are bulletproof. Go
Yeah.
find an old electrical coil stove, toss it in your house. Here's the thing. This is my big, big question about North American people, right? Are we more likely to have a civil war or choose to live more minimally?
Oh,
Right?
I think we're more likely to have a civil war, and you see that just like
I've been living minimally for a long
But it's,
time.
I
To
like,
avoid civil
seriously,
war.
like I just wonder. It's like because this is why I think the government is making decisions that they make. Right? It's like because there's a precarious position when you've created this addiction to credit, to cheap goods, to middle class life. Right? Where in North America, I think, and I think you're starting to see it already on both sides of the political spectrum, where you're getting the marginalized groups, economically marginalized groups, are starting this like, and there's cannibalism on these groups, like you know what I mean, like everybody's, and these are like these micro kind of like conflicts that happen as like this civil unrest starts to happen.
Absolutely, and I think that happens every time you see economic downturns. But go ahead, what were you
No,
saying?
no, that's just that to me is like the most interesting thing to watch as a result, right? Because I think that like you're literally one severe financial stress away from like if you like look at the layoffs happening in the States, like
Of course.
this shit is just getting
It's just
started.
getting started
Yeah.
because rate hikes are still on the table. We're probably going to see a 50
We'll see
shot
another
in
50 in
June,
2 weeks.
maybe a 75
Yeah.
shot. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's definitely not off the table.
minimum 50.
Minimum
I think.
50,
Yeah.
probably with another one thereafter. I kind of tapped into this a little bit earlier. Again, back to this petrodollar scenario. I think we got to pay attention to it because if demand for US dollars is falling, that sort of creates a bottom or a pitless bottom for their currency to literally drop over time. So they may have to, raise rates to chase inflation, whatever, without a choice. They may not be able to cut. We have to sort of follow them here. If that thesis is correct, we're not going to see that cyclical, quick pendulum swing back where we're going to see cuts sooner than later.
We're not following the historical rise and
We may
fall of
not.
interest rates fighting inflation.
We may
yeah.
not, and that's why I mentioned, was this a debt trap? Because the more I look at it, and again, not everybody's going to agree, and that's fine. I'm just looking to create conversation around it. But you had Tiff Macklem, right, the BOC governor, and what was it, like 2 years ago? Go out there, spend, use credit, rates are going to stay low.
Were you lying back then? Did you know?
Well, he must have been. It's
Yeah.
either you fucking knew it and you lied to us, or you're too stupid.
Yeah.
But either way, like,
Yeah, and this is where I think I go back to that quote, right? Like that I actually like it's like was it conspiracy and they lied to you? Because I don't think we needed to stimulate the economy then.
of course not.
So what is the objective of telling Canadians to go out and spend, at record rates,
Exactly,
right?
to load them on debt.
So
but
to me, it's like I actually think that it's the latter. I don't think it may be too stupid, but I actually just think they don't have control. They don't have the right data, right? They don't have the
do
right
you think
information.
that they
and
did the right moves, though? And I know
No.
it's funny for us to be, armchair quarterbacks
Yeah.
and shit, because I would do this,
Yeah.
and, but obviously I get that part. But you brought this up earlier in terms of the pandemic. You mentioned hospital capacity being an issue. If we circle back to the beginning of when things kicked off and we actually did that
Right.
initial 2-week lockdown,
Right.
did they say it was deadly in equivalency to the Spanish flu? Not really. That wasn't the case. The case was we lacked capacity.
Right.
That was the issue.
Right.
So they've printed record number of money, billions and billions and billions. Have we seen a material increase in capacity?
No, and we have and this,
So, like-
this is where I keep saying about we're literally refusing to grow the economy. Like
Yeah.
it's like I don't know if they have so much faith in capitalism. They're like, oh, let's just give all the people lots of money and then just hope they solve their own fucking problems.
What was that thing that Trudeau always said? The balance
The
will balance
budget will
itself?
balance
Yeah.
itself?
Yeah. Show me.
But
Teach
like-
me to that. What?
It's like,
How?
yeah, like we're not building our own hospital beds, right?
No.
Like,
But
and
they'll just come. Someone
right,
will
Yeah,
build
they'll
them.
pop
yeah,
up.
well,
Yeah.
we're not allowed. You
Yeah.
can't have a private
Yeah.
like.
God forbid.
But so it's like to me, it's like that's a very good example of like somewhere where I think that there's a government like short-sightedness on the government that it's like here's a problem that needs solving, and by solving that problem, you're creating economic output, right? More
Correct.
nurses, more people to build these things,
Yes.
more, maybe we have to build these specialized equipment.
Medical infrastructure,
right?
That's a good way to do it.
And
Instead
now-
of people got stimmy checks, businesses got these loans for 40 grand that I feel like I think they were free. I want to say
It was
almost,
like
or
if
grants
you
or
get up to
something.
60K, I think. Was it 60?
For a certain
40K,
amount
and then
of
if you
employees
paid
or
30 of it
something?
back, you got 10 grand.
Yeah.
You got to keep 10 grand.
Like so this is why, and let's just bring it to central banks for a second, because by the way, a lot of people and it kind of like I'm very pro Bitcoin. I don't know about you guys. I
Right.
don't know. We've actually spoken
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
But my position on Bitcoin has nothing to do with speculative. It has nothing to do with flipping. It has nothing to do
No,
with
no.
like a monetary gain.
Right.
It has to do with the opposite, monetary independence. And what I
Right.
mean is a central bank, what their job is essentially, obviously, to keep score, tally, and record of what's going on. But at the same time, they need to put money out in terms of input into productive means, right? So everything that we just saw happen literally was the opposite of that.
Mhm.
And so now, like you were saying, like they did all this stuff. The Bank of Canada was buying up bonds. A lot of liquidity was created. And when you see a lot of liquidity in a specific market, any market, like you said, dollar volume,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
If that inflates or if that amount goes up, the associated product or asset that's tied to that market will go up as well. So we've seen that. And so now the difference is, and I always say this, and I don't know if people realize that is static. Asset values are fluid.
I love
What
that.
happens now,
Yeah.
man?
Yeah.
What happens now?
Mhm.
Especially if they're chasing inflation out due to a currency scenario.
And when I like sort of what I believe is the outcome of what's happening with the monetary system right now is that we'll see some sort of I actually don't think that the monetary system that we're going to end up with in the next 20 years anybody has even thought about yet. But I
Okay.
think you know what I mean. Like,
Do you think we're going to go through some change or reset, like
Well,
in some sense?
yeah, I don't see how we can't. Right? Like
Right.
you've literally got to the point where the disparity that has been created is so severe that
Yeah.
like you can't have a functioning economy safely, like because there's
Yeah.
literally like now you're almost like you've evolved to like a near modern day feudalism where there's like
100%.
hoarding of capital,
The
hoarding
have
of
and
land.
have-nots.
Assets.
You hear people like I posted that thing about Blackstone, and like I was
Yeah.
actually like nearly supportive of Blackstone, like not Blackstone, but like the idea of institutional landlording, right?
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, like maybe not supportive, but I'm just trying to explore the whole thing. So it's like this is how we could end up with the German housing economy, German whatever. It doesn't matter what country, but like high institutional ownership, low home ownership, high generational home ownership if you end up, or multi-generational home ownership where people do own. And most young people and most people in urban areas rent their houses, right? And
Until
you
they
get
inherit mom and dad's,
right.
if that's the case.
And then and they actually have better lives and they invest elsewhere, and and this goes back to my thought about cyclicality, right? It's like now we're at this point where everybody wants to hoard Canadian housing because it's the place to be, and it does go down that way. And as we get into a later cycle OECD economy or later cycle Western economy, more and more houses start to get picked off by institutions. You start to have like an actual working class and actual middle class where they're, they work, they go to work, they save money, they invest in things that they believe in. Doesn't matter. They don't need to be strapped to a levered savings vehicle just to scrape by for retirement.
How does if that happens and there's less individual ownership, just to touch on what you said, and there's more institutional ownership, how does the average person get ahead?
They don't.
So what does that mean? What kind of society are we then living in?
One that I think the majority of the world the political world is probably trying to settle into. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's so much pushed for, but like I think that like
just evolving there naturally.
I do think it's kind of a natural thing,
see that,
right?
Yeah.
Like that's like
because
the cyclicality,
like you
man.
said, it's a late stage scenario.
Well,
right?
if you can give everybody a decent quality of life
in exchange for ownership of individual assets,
or
is
whatever
that more
it is,
valuable than hoarding of assets with a less quality of life for most.
I don't know. Like when I was younger, I would have said like no, but I think that now I'm starting to realize that like a lot of people are complacent and like they don't want like I always think about like Tesla, right? It's like everyone's like, yeah, like in 10 years, like Teslas are going to be driving us everywhere. It's like, okay, well, so you just got yourself 2 hours back, right? Because you don't have your commute anymore. What are you going to do at the time? Like, really, what are you going to do? Flip through fucking Instagram a little bit longer, right?
Watch Netflix.
Seriously.
Watch this podcast, obviously.
Yeah. but like to me, so I just think that like the average person settles very quickly. And so like I would say that if it's easy to not prey on that, but it's easy to accommodate that, right?
Yeah.
If you can give people enough to get by and like live, like most people like think they want like the Rolex and the yacht and like the bitches in Miami. They do,
that
but
sounded like a pretty good lineup. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, oh, shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I've had a lot of guys like approach me and they're like, "Hey, I want to learn to do what you do," right? And then they'll come work with me and they quit very like I've had a lot of guys who go the guys who have it, they go like they're making more money than I am now. The guys who I've trained.
Wow.
Because like but there's people who come and they'll sit with me, they'll cold call, they'll do whatever, and they're like, "Fuck this. I'm not there." Like I'll go back to doing what I was doing before, because you see how hard it is.
Of course,
right? So yeah, you want it. Like I think that the average person, and like we know in the current economy, like there's the statistics, right? Your happiness return on capital, happiness return on capital caps at $70.
Yeah,
70,000.
Yeah.
So let's say, so let's adjust it for inflation. So if you can give everybody $100,000 a year lifestyle, and like you've delivered what governments are supposed to be delivering,
right? In terms of quality of life, I agree with you. I think for the most part, there's a lot of people that would want to live in that sort of society. But like, let's take the example of Steve Jobs, right? Because kind of what we're saying, it's like a better version of communism in a sense, where there's a greater level of equality. What if he was born in the Soviet Union?
Right.
We have the iPhone. What happens to innovation? Because it dies off. Like you said, complacency would go up. The desire to want to build, innovate, grow, do things of value for society, for future generations will fall off. So is that what we want from like a macro social engineering perspective?
Not per se. Like you can't erase upward mobility. But to me, like I think the Western world isn't a place where like I think that in any cycle, upward mobility gets erased, right? Like at the end. So and Canada is a country in which I really think that that's happening in real time. The US like was probably the one place in the world where upward mobility was at its peak, right? So like you could like anybody could make it. That was why everybody wanted to go to America. And it's still kind of like that, right? Now you're starting to see more of this like concept of upward mobility happening at a global level, right? So it's like somebody from Africa who's impoverished, all they need to do is save for a plane ticket to get to America, as an example. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger being a good example as well, right? Like going to America from like being like a pretty broke, like roided up guy in Austria, right? And then and making it, right? But so it's like all you got to do is get that step. So like the globalization, I think, has changed the mechanics of that American dream or rags to riches.
So you're saying it's a harder thing to attain these days because inequality has grown, fewer are actually making it. It's not as available to the average sort of person coming.
Well, as capital gets hoarded, it becomes less available, right? Exactly. So like more and more people, like people who have it want to stay there, right? And so they're, like a lot of people you saw a lot of guys like, funds, or bigger, like high net worth guys starting to exit the market like towards the peak, right? And they're like, yeah, okay, maybe I'm going to leave 2 or 3 months of growth on the table, but like they're out in like November of last year.
Which, by the way, I can't stress that enough. I love that strategy.
Way easier to sell on the way up than the way down.
Way better.
Well, it's easy. There's liquidity on the way up.
You got too many people that want to literally squeeze every last drop, and they're like, "No, I'll stay in for another month. I'll stay in for another month."
That's the scarcity mentality. That's the people who are trying to find that upward mobility, right? And this is what I've learned based on like because I like when when COVID started, I couldn't show properties for a while. So it was
Right.
like I was just on like Wall Street bets and shit. Like before,
yeah.
yeah, like and this was like pre Wall Street bets becoming huge. But like
Really? Oh,
it's people have to be, they have to make desperate moves to try and find that upward mobility now. The risk that you have to take to make that gap up
yeah.
from
So you're
middle
you're
class.
saying that was the sort of underlying demand aspect for things like stonks, like GMC,
maybe.
GME, and
To me, it's
AMC?
just like a reflection. I don't know if like, I think that stuff's kind of clear. It's just like a bunch of retail money being pumped in with like no.
Yeah, because I
Yeah,
mean they had
retail
no other
investors.
opportunity to get that upward mobility that you're
Right.
sort of speaking to.
Yeah,
it
so,
makes
like,
us take greater risk. Right?
Say it's at like before, if there was a middle class, you could either fall slowly out of it or grow slowly out of it, right?
Right.
And you could do that with marginal returns. As that gap grows, you can no longer get marginal returns because you're chasing it up, right?
Right.
So like if you fall to the bottom, now you're lower middle class. If you want to become upper middle class, you got to go risk it all on an AMC
Yes.
YOLO,
Yeah.
right?
You have to, yeah.
And you're seeing that phenomenon in Canada, et cetera. It's these desperation, these scarcity-based economic moves,
Mhm.
right? And people risk it all to try and get,
yeah.
And so I don't like, to me, I just don't know how we change, like how we ever get back to where we were before. That's why I think that the monetary economy is like just fully broken.
I agree.
It comes down to almost like it's human emotion and plays way too much a role in at this point after the last 2 years
Yes.
of, again, free money being dumped in, while everyone watching the real estate market, becoming millionaires, people becoming millionaires overnight, not doing anything, right? So I think it's a combination of laziness, of ignorance and greed that have played a pretty major role to get us to where we are today.
Well, you can't earn during COVID, you couldn't earn and outsave. If you're an average Canadian, you could not earn and outsave your house. Okay, so like the average Canadian home made more money than the average Canadian.
Exactly.
100%.
Crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that is crazy, and that speaks to the broken system. And
Right.
so let's
But
go.
that also speaks to the broken people that manage that system. And I'm not talking government organizations. I want to bring this right down to like the people in this room
like the
and our
individuals.
our counterparts out in the mortgage world and the real
Yeah.
estate world that did a lot of disservice to the economy and
Yeah.
to a lot of other individuals out there. Using the example you just brought up,
Yeah.
that's one example.
But
We've
here's the
seen that
question.
happen
Do
thousands of times.
and of course, and there's plenty of stories.
Tens
where
of
that came
thousands,
from.
hundreds of thousands of times.
100%.
You take that story and times it by 100,000. That's a major issue.
But okay, so let's look at it like that. So let's say, obviously there's a ton of realtors out there that are wolves, whether in sheep's clothing or not. Some aren't. Some are straightforward and you'll see them for what they are within 2 seconds. But how much responsibility falls on them? And more importantly, would it not be better for society, in your opinion at least, if people and the individual took more responsibility for things like that happening?
Yes and no, like because you hire somebody.
How much trust?
Well, there's a fiduciary duty, right? Like, and
For
so
sure.
we either need to pretend that like, or admit that that's gone, right?
We need to pretend that. I mean, we need to admit that there's a problem with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, did you see the headline today that I posted from? It was a CBC
Which
article,
one?
I believe.
What-
I'm gonna pull it up. It was like basically that I actually, because in the early '90s there was that speculation crisis, right? And
Yes.
so like the basically the worst correction in Canadian housing from '89 to '94.
Mhm. The
Hap-
bottom.
Yeah, and so what was happening was like this massive home building happening, and people were buying and selling houses like 6-7 times before the end user ever moved
Yeah,
in, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
like flipping it.
Really?
Yeah. And this was like during that speculator. They called it like, I don't know what it's called. There's a name for it. Like you talk to like any boomer and like they all know about this thing. But this is the same thing that's happening right now, right?
Yeah.
And it would
absolutely.
probably be like in 10 years, everybody's gonna be talking about like the bidding war crisis, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was like a speculation crisis or something like that. After that crash, realtors were roasted. Absolutely
sure.
roasted because and like
6
Abe,
months from
Abe
now,
asked
boom, realtors are getting
Mark,
fucking
I
roasted.
really think so. And this headline, I actually didn't think it was going to happen already.
Oh, I did see you post.
Yeah, it was like I can't remember what it was,
Something
but it was like
about,
like price fixing. Agents are like basically
Yeah.
price fixing
Yes.
on
price fixing and
I
agents
would-
getting sued.
I would
Yeah.
consider that story you just told us, that's price
Horrific.
fixing.
100%.
Also, here's another step for you, and this is out of the States. So for anyone listening, loan officers in the States are the same thing as mortgage
Yes.
officers in Canada, mortgage agents in Canada. I got to find this and maybe we can put it in the show notes or something like that. But apparently upwards of 40% of loan officers are not going to be renewing their license in the States
No shit.
coming at the end
Yeah, I
of this
tried
year.
to find that stat, but I
Why?
couldn't. But
But because I
market
think
contraction.
because I think a lot of loan officers, whether at the end of the career, and a lot of them are boomers,
Yeah.
right? A lot of real estate agents and
Right.
mortgage officers or loan officers in North America, they're all in the boomer
Yeah.
age, right? So we're
Yeah.
going to see probably 20-30% of them exit
Right.
in the next few years, anyways. For instance, my dad's a teacher. My dad's a boomer. My dad had to start teaching online. You think he wanted to fucking do
No.
that? You think he wanted to
It's a hard
adapt?
pivot for that
It's
generation.
adapt or die at this point. And a
Yes.
lot of them would rather die than
Right.
adapt at this point.
Assuming they have the ability and even luxury to do that. to
Exactly.
exit.
Now
But they
that's just
do-
a certain
sorry.
that's just a certain group of them. Now we look at the agents on the real estate side and the mortgage side that don't know what they're fucking doing,
Yeah.
that are ignorant, that are greedy, that have pushed people to the top of their budget and have given them shitty advice and are literally kind of, it's like with your clients, you do the deal and never see you again. No. I do my deals with clients that I want to be working with for the rest of my life.
100%.
These people,
and by the way, let's not pretend that we're super philanthropic and incredible angel type human beings, which I think we are in some
good guys,
sense.
but
We're good guys, but
I'm doing this to make money. But I want my clients to make money.
Smart business because you want less churn of your book of business.
I don't want to, and I don't want to be getting a call a year from now. You fucked me. How did the fuck did you do this? And I tell you right now, there's going to be a lot of agents 100%. That aren't agents anymore because they're scared of what they've done. There's going to be a lot of people staying up being like, I should not have told those people to do that.
I don't even know if it's because they're scared. I think that a lot of agents are going to exit the business because they don't know how to do the job in a bear market.
Yes.
Exactly. Because what was being a real estate agent in the last couple of years? You literally go and like Dan and I have this thing, a door opener, right? You go, you open the door. And again, I came from commercial real estate. Commercial real estate guys are hard on the resi side. They just call them bus stop agents. And that's what they are, right? You go open the door. Here's the kitchen, here's the bathroom. I've never been here before. What's the basement?
To be fair, the buy side,
they don't know.
The buy side was hard for the past 2 years. You have to be so like that door
listing agents.
But if you were listing for the past 2 years, it was like there's like two like really funny things. I heard. It was like the 3 P's of real estate. It was like price it, and then like in brackets like wrong because like everybody's underpricing it. Put a sign up and pray, and then it was it. And then there was like I don't know, it was like list it and leave. That was it.
That's it.
Because that's all you had to do, right? Like realistically.
I also think that you saw an influx of people get into the market because typically, like you said, when dollar volumes enter the space, people look at it from the outside in. People got lazy. You had this transition or pipeline. I saw this meme on 6Buzz. I thought it was pretty accurate. Maybe you guys saw it too. The whole like former bottle girl becoming a realtor kind of thing, right? So like people from the outside looking in, especially like you said, because at this stage now, nobody really wants to really work hard. Because working hard sucks, and it's like people don't see the value.
And I just got free money for the last 2 years. My GameStop went like 5,000% up. Why would I work?
So you saw them get into the business because they thought it was easy. And the truth is they did well because of marketing. But was it real marketing or was it simply doing things like TikTok and these bullshit sort of posts?
Or it wasn't marketing. It was just a good market. Like I think a lot of people.
I would agree with that more.
Like,
so.
It was just
more
like
the market.
I would say a lot of those people that got in are shit marketers.
But why did the bad agents get the business?
They didn't. I don't think they actually.
Think so?
No, I think they got some business because I think there was too much business.
But again, I think there was so much business that they got a percentage worth noting.
Which were worth
yes, but that could be 20% of it, right? Because there was so much business that shouldn't have been.
We were running 25% hot for the whole for all of COVID.
So that 25% hot fell to the people that should not have been doing business.
Yeah, I mean, there's excess business, like, and I think that we had created this phenomenon. Social media exacerbates the fact that, and this to me is like this is the systemic problem with Canada. All we talk about is housing, and it's because our economy depends on housing.
Yes.
But seriously, and social media exacerbated that. So in the States, retail money was chasing stonks, and you were hearing about it everywhere, right?
Yes.
It was like all over the fucking news when it started. AMC, GME, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
In Canada, it's like, well, what's our get rich quick scheme?
Housing.
What's retail? It's housing.
Quick, yeah.
And seriously, so everybody was chasing housing, and then it was like, okay, well, people were on TikTok. Like every platform had their conversation around this shit, and there was spillover business that could fall easily into the hands of those people. But the reason that a lot of agents could do deals easily and get deals easily was because they were letting the market do their job for them, right? And they were saying houses only go up, and it's easy to be right. Everybody can be a rocket scientist on the way up, right? A lot of geniuses from 2020 to 2022, right?
I'd love to speak to some of them now.
But this is the challenge, and like now, a lot of these people are really, really dealing with issues because if I was telling my client in February of this year, like, oh yeah, fuck, you should buy this house because like, look, 30% year over year, it's been up 5% since January. For sure, it's going to do that by March because like
only go up.
Past returns are indicative of future results, right?
I think a part of the problem is that because we've seen a lot of bull runs on average, on and off. I mean, we saw 2016, up until early 2017 boom. We've seen this now. I don't think there's enough recourse or liability that agents are exposed to per se. That maybe gives them the confidence to just say shit without any sort of.
And that lawsuit that I posted about that has the power to change that, right?
Could it though? Because agents are still insured.
Yeah,
right?
but so it would still fall on E&O. But watch how quickly, like so it's like title insurance. Like you fuck up grading on your property as an example, and it floods a city, and you did this. Like you got an excavator one day and just started dicking around, right? And then somebody buys it, and 2 years later, it causes this huge problem. Title insurance will pay for the problem, right? That's what the insurance is for. But title insurance is fucking coming after you.
Absolutely.
They're going to hunt you down and they're going to come after you and they're going to get that money from you. Even if it's not all of it, they're going to come after you.
And they'll raise the premium probably, right?
E&O is going to either, like, I don't know how this plays out, but if agents deliberately, like, you have to imagine an insurer is the last person you want chasing you
Oh,
for
absolutely.
money,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'd
Like,
rather a
everybody's
road
like,
shark than,
yeah,
than an insurance
but people
company,
are like, oh yeah, you know, like, it's like, oh, you know, but like, there's a lot of fucking deals not closing right now. Like,
I
a
totally
lot.
agree.
Yeah.
And this again, this is what I was saying earlier. People point to things like, oh, it's only 10% drop off or 20 and whatever. Who's really suffering? If you
Right.
don't sell, you don't lose. But
Right.
again, when that stuff starts to happen and deals fail to
Yeah.
close and it becomes a domino effect,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then you start to see the financing that represents that under the hood
Yeah.
not function the way it should.
Yeah.
This creates momentum and it becomes a negative feedback loop.
And
Totally.
then the part where people don't realize where that ends is when it starts to get contagion into the pre-construction world, right?
Yes.
So if
which
because
we've already started to see.
well, and it's so easy for the positive feedback loop. People see prices going up, they buy pre-con projects.
Wealth effect.
Right? Yeah, wealth effect. People are the deposits are insured. You can go get construction financing. Projects being constructed. Okay, who are the people in our generation, other than people in our space? I would say, like, you know, independent contractors doing real estate transactions, basically.
Right.
Who are the highest wage earners? Trades, right? What happens if condo buildings stop being built, right? And so that, to me, is where you get, like, that's your oh shit moment,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
In the GTA. And I don't know if that we get there, but, like, that is, to me, where, and then you start to see, as that starts happening, that's when the what I would say your concrete bottom of the price floor, which is the cost to rebuild a house,
Of course.
right? The replacement cost could potentially get deflationary.
No,
right?
100%. And I think the same could be said. And again, it's not really spoken enough. People, again, point to the chart that shows the stats for real estate and where things are at. Like, we always see it, and that's sort of the measurement or gauge of how things are doing. But we got to look at credit markets. That's the number one thing.
For sure.
Because with credit markets, what's going to happen now, all the contraction and stuff, and people don't realize, like, they think shit can't fail. Do you guys know what happened? Like, I posted this. Maybe you guys saw it, the 2017 thing with Home Trust, Home
Right,
Capital.
yeah. The
Dude,
Buffett
The
bailout,
Buffett
yeah.
moment, yeah.
I remember I was laying in bed and I read that headline and I was like, here it goes. I was like,
Yeah.
this is over. Because that was
Yeah.
after the 2017 crash, right?
So that happened in like May or June. That was like early
Mickey, just
stage.
elaborate on that. What do you?
Okay, so 2017, we saw something similar that we're seeing now, but for different reasons. So the first thing that, I mean, we talked about this
Well, that's
earlier,
because
but
also the fail-safe. Everyone just compares this crash to
it's not
all the other
same.
crashes, but it's
This one's different. This one I would say is more, it's got, in my opinion, obviously, I think it's more relatable in some sense to the early 90s crash from the inflationary standpoint. And I also, and a lot of people may not agree, but I think it's got elements of the 2008 crash. Not because it's globally systemic, but I do think it's extremely systemic here in Canada.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
widespread. It's
For
not
sure.
isolated to just a couple lenders. But back to the 2017 moment, the first thing that happened, again, we saw this bull run. I think buyers got exhausted, which typically is what happens. They start to tap.
It's the herd mentality.
The herd mentality.
I will chime in here because
Please.
we were this was where
Yeah,
we dropped off when we were talking
Yeah.
outside. I always look at it from the supply side, right?
Okay.
So it maybe buyers were tapping out, but what you also see is when prices go up,
Yeah.
everyone's like, and this comes back to housing being our primary conversation because it was the same thing in 2017. Everywhere you went, everybody's fucking talking about
Totally.
housing.
Yeah.
You get opportunistic selling, right? So what I saw on the data side in the 2 weeks leading up to the non-resident speculation tax introduction was record high flood of listings.
Really?
Okay, because everybody's like,
Offloading.
"Oh, I'm a
was-
millionaire.
yeah.
I'm gonna fucking sell. I'm gonna
Yeah.
time the market,
Yeah.
right?" And so as soon as you get that, you like, and it
That
literally,
starts it.
well, and that's what we're seeing happening right now,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah.
a flood of listings that instantly takes you to a buyer's market, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that definitely starts pushing momentum in that direction.
Right.
And that's basically what we started to see now, except again, slight differences. But in 2017, that did happen first. The government, as always, just like with rate hikes now, they're always a little late to the party. Which,
Or they because things were turning over in like I was on Klute's podcast like the day before because I think it was the day that Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau announced the coalition, and then I was
Yeah.
like, watch, they're going to introduce a fucking huge
Yeah.
policy. They're probably going to ban foreign buyers within like a week,
something, yeah.
and they did the next week. But like that's not predictory because like
Yeah.
they said that they would do that in the
Yeah,
thing,
that's
but
part of the.
but they did that as the market was rolling over. So
Yeah.
that I'm thinking to myself, and I think non-resident speculation tax is the same thing. It's like market's rolling over, throw the tax at it, say that it did something.
it's
Because I
not.
don't think it
Exactly.
did
No, dude.
anything. It
Of
was
course
so
not.
easily
Dude, the-
10
circumvented.
years,
what
10
the-
years too late. That started
Yeah.
in Vancouver
But it's-
10 years ago. And
Like
Yeah,
the
send a
2017 tax, the foreign buyer
Yeah.
tax, I promise you, if we get into that, in terms of what the outside looking in would think of it, to me, it should have been a non-material event.
It was a non-material event.
Right?
It was a sentiment shaker, but
That's
we're
right.
already on the rollover.
And that's speaking to what you said earlier. It's that the market is driven by sentiment. All markets,
Yeah.
like
Animal
real estate,
spirits.
yeah, literally, right? Real estate, stock market, stuff like that. So when that started to happen, that again, you know, the average person. That's why I like doing this sort of thing, and I post the way I do, and I think you're the same, and it's you as well. But really, at the end of the day, when people watch the news and they see sales being down 20%, 30%, the average person doesn't understand what that actually means, right? They're looking at it and they could confuse that for like the price dropping 20%.
Yeah.
There's a lack of sort of comprehension due to a lack of financial literacy and all this other shit. But
That's why I always use price and volume terms.
I love that you
anyway.
did. You know what? That's a really good way to look at it. And that's probably, I would say, the best indicator because it's most accurate. But we started to see that in 2017. You know, Home Trust, great company. I've done a lot of business with them. They're a B lender. But the truth is, it's all about the source of capital, right? So every lender has their different source of capital. Home Trust has a flighty source of capital in the sense that they raise funds from something known as a high interest savings account. Meaning, if you put your money into a savings account with them, you will get probably, I want to say, roughly 3 to 5 times more than what your traditional institutional bank would offer. So naturally, that's how they pull money in, right? But at the same time, if sentiment shifts and people start to feel like, oh shit, deals could go bad, they'll withdraw it because it's so easily accessible. It's not locked away. It's not tied in. You can literally pull it out at any point. What people also didn't realize, and it speaks to mentality, is that they have insurance on those accounts up to 100. There's still CDIC insured up to 100 grand. People didn't realize, nor did they care, because they acted on emotion. So when and dude, you got to get Mark Cahodes, please. I love that guy.
Yeah.
If he's watching somehow, I love you, buddy. You know, but he was shorting it from like 2015. Shorting, by the way, means when you're betting against a stock. It's the opposite of going long. So he was shorting it from 2015. 2015, there was some whistleblower in Home Trust. I think it was either a broker or it was an internal person that came out and was like, dude, this stuff is a bunch of bullshit. There's income fraud and blah, 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 blah. So he caught on to it at that point. He was also very bearish on Vancouver specifically, just because Sam Cooper, another good guy, if we can get, that would be
That's
cool.
like the mortgage fraud episode. So,
That would be,
I mean, dude, if you want to head that up, like, no, seriously, like, I need it. So talk
the
to
voice changer, guys.
No, like, not even like, but maybe just you could just like be the guy asking the questions,
Yeah,
moderate.
like, I would love to. Yeah.
So because talk to Vijesh about it. The
Yeah,
guy
I
he
will.
writes for Motley Fool. And like Sam was interested, Ben's interested.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that'll be a banger.
And Ben seems to think he can get Sam to join to have this conversation. So
I think he could.
yeah, so let's like maybe just start a thread about
Totally,
that.
yeah,
for
no,
sure.
because I think that's so critical. And so he shorts it, right? He buys in. He starts shorting it at like $50 a share. A couple years go on, nothing starts to drip out. It's almost like in The Big Short, right?
Yeah.
They made these bets. They were 100%
Still
right.
paying the premiums.
And they're still paying the premiums. They're like, what the fuck? Like, why isn't the price
should have
changing?
broken years
like
ago.
foreclosures are going up, the
Yeah.
premiums not changing, like stuff like that. But eventually in 2017, once things started to roll over, a lot of that flighty capital started to exit Home Trust to the point where their liquidity dried up. I saw this. I was around. I literally witnessed it. And it was I think it was in May or June of 2017 where they had this moment, this like almost Lehman moment, like Lehman Brothers moment, where they were going to go bust in the morning. Like it was to the last second.
I remember distinctly that day, like thinking that the Canadian real estate economy was about
and
to
if
go.
it failed,
So what happened? What was the
Okay,
what was the
Buffett came in.
Buffett, out of
Daddy
all
Buffett.
characters, it's like a movie. Somebody should make a movie. Warren fucking Buffett, and I got to tell you, I do think that was a private sector bailout. I do have a
I
feeling.
agree. I mean, he was already heavily invested in BAM, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, they had bought, like he owns Royal LePage, all that
Yeah.
shit, right? So,
But why would he buy this fucking toxic debt that they had at that time? Like,
I think because there's an easy exit, and
Because of him
he had,
being who he is, and he
but
knew-
there was other exposure, right? Like because again, like if you're exposed to like BRE, BAM,
Yeah,
all those like
yeah.
other Canadian assets,
yeah.
I mean, it's an easy way to basically come. Like that guy actually has big enough like moves that like Canada's tiny. Man.
You're
People
saying
don't get
you're
this.
saying he has big enough, like he's a
He
whale.
could save- yeah,
could
he did.
sway it. Yeah. But again,
he did, I think, with that move.
Like,
I actually,
saved it?
yeah, I think so.
No, he totally
At
saved
that
it.
point,
But
yeah.
don't think he's like you got to understand who he is and what
Yeah,
happened here.
right.
So there was two aspects to the deal that he did. I don't know 100%, but generally speaking, it was like a $400 million
Line
share
of credit, wasn't it?
So first he bought $400 million worth of share. That moves the market just
Yeah.
based on their market cap.
Yeah.
Like $400 million is a lot of money.
Yeah.
So him entering the game and spending that much dough to just play it, automatically pumped the share price
Wait,
just right off the rip.
But then that gives confidence to all
Confidence,
of the
Warren
mix in the
Buffett
market,
shit
and then
like that.
well, then people are rushing into mix. So now
Yeah.
you bring up a lot of the credit back in the other lending
Exactly,
space.
and again, it sort of sustained sentiment because if the headlines at the time, if you remember, was like Buffett bullish on Ontario
Canadian,
real estate
yeah.
or Canadian.
He's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
But he was it
Yeah.
had nothing to do with
Yeah.
it, dude. He
Yeah.
made so much money on the
Yeah, it was-
shares, but then he also gave them a $2 billion line of credit
Yeah.
facility
Yeah.
that he raped them on. And his exit on the shares was a 70% profit gain. And I think some pension fund ended up buying him out for the line of credit.
Yeah, there was a flip. I
Dude,
can't
he
remember.
made a fortune. He
Yeah,
ripped their
that
eyeballs
was a good
out.
deal. Yeah, but that was like that guy just they know like I don't know. There's like 5 guys in the world that deal could be taken to.
Oh,
it's
100%.
either like Home Trust is going and the Canadian
Yeah.
real estate market
then
is going with
Contagion
it.
is insane.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're the biggest B, right?
E-Space, yeah. And it was already rippling over to Equitable. And then,
Yeah.
of course, as this is happening, you have Mark on BNN, like
Yeah.
Mark Hodes, constantly, like, his thesis was bang on. I feel bad, but I respect him, and I'll tell you why. So just back to the short position he
Yeah.
took. He goes in at like $50 a share, right? And this thing's just dumping. Like, it's going down
Yeah.
to like, 10, 8.
But he stayed in, right?
He stayed in even at 5. And they asked him, like, why don't you sell? You have such a huge exit. He's like, fuck them. Because he's a contrarian. Like, he doesn't give a
Yeah.
shit. It's not about money. So you have to respect the guy. And I hate that, you know what? I do believe in capitalism. And when too big to fail and stuff like that happens, it defeats the purpose. We don't have true capitalism.
No, I
This
agree.
is fucking bumper lane bowling
It's
at
so
this
funny.
point.
Like I would say we don't even have true capitalism in just that. Like when we go back to money, like rental properties that lose money. Okay,
Yeah.
you're socializing the
Negative
cost. You're
Yes.
socializing the cost
Yes.
of affordable housing. That's silly. So like Chad wants to get a fucking condo at One Bloor. You
Yeah.
know, and he's dealing drugs like or whatever he's
Yeah.
doing at
Sounds
over,
like a great
over,
guy, by the way.
over at UFC, yeah, or
Sex
whatever, right?
trafficking,
But he
something.
can't afford it because he's
Yeah.
a drug dealer or whatever, right? So it's like he's renting it off of a either a foreign direct investor or
Yeah.
some domestic investor or whatever, and
Yeah.
who is losing money.
Yeah, losing money, playing the
Sociali-
appreciation side of it.
Right.
But this speaks to where momentum can now shift. So, okay, you have 40%. Again, back to that stat. 40%. This is a fucking crazy stat. Think
Yeah.
about this. 40% of Canadian homeowners own multiple properties. It's fair to assume if they own 2 or 3, now you have the multiple factor of how much they're losing per month on negative carry.
Right.
And when there's no rainbow at the end of the road, so to speak, or pot of gold as we had with this appreciational aspect,
Yeah.
what happens now? Does that then put them in a position to throw? Because we saw that in 2017. I saw this in the suburbs, specifically in the 905 housing market, because you had guys, let's say in pockets like Vaughan, whose value went up so much that they would then refinance. I assisted with a lot of these deals. That would be now their down payment on a property deeper into Richmond Hill.
Yeah.
Now, those properties, negative carry, who cares? No problem.
Who cares? I'm going to make
I'm gonna make
400,000
money.
off of
Yeah.
appreciation
Exactly.
in 2 years.
Exactly. 2017 comes in, bam, all of a sudden, the whole supply narrative that we spoke about earlier, where the whole story was like, there's not enough, they're not building enough. I agree with it in the sense that they're not building enough rental purpose properties. That is 1,000% true.
That's a
which
major
bothers me.
Canadian issue in general.
Major.
We should
That
start.
is a
We
problem.
should start a fund for something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, do
Let's
it.
call it Blackstone.
Yeah, well, exactly. Just fuck them, just take it from them. But and so that sort of is a big issue. But I don't believe the narrative of the ability to buy. Like I don't think there's enough. Like there's not enough houses for sale per se. Because in 2017 we also had this very low month of inventory scenario, right? This
Yeah.
low MOI, kind of like we had now. I don't think it hit the same bottom like we saw now. I think we were like the lowest like half a month, like 0.5 or some shit. On
When
MOI.
recently?
Like in this recent bull
Yeah,
run. It was
yeah.
something crazy. Like it was to the point where
Yeah.
it was like so dry.
Yeah.
But back then, funny enough, without having to build, without new projects hitting the market, guess what? Sentiment shifted. All these things we talked about started happening.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I'd go on MLS, like the little red dots or on Realtor, like the app, and it looked like a teenager's face. There was like pimples everywhere, these red
Yeah.
dots. And each circle
Supply
represented
flood.
like 50 properties,
Yeah.
So that's the thing.
And that's how it happened. Like to me, that's how it rolled over, and I think that's sort of how it's rolling over right now too, right?
The question is, where does it all go? And can the average Canadian survive? And my biggest concern is I do generally think, and I think you guys would agree, it's too big to fail. It's systemic,
Yeah, to me, it's well, like
I think.
the thing that I think is like I think Canadians are relatively resilient, but I don't know if
Do
we
you
can
think so?
withstand. See, this is the thing. Like I think that by relatively, I mean that like if the hedonic equation for a household
Yeah.
earnings was one variable,
Yeah.
like house price shock, we
Yeah.
could do it, right?
Right.
And 2017 showed us that. Like there was a 40% come off in
But
values.
don't forget, they didn't. Okay, so first of all, the entire hike cycle of rates back then, we've already matched in a
Right.
very short period
No,
of time.
But the other piece is that it was just house prices at that point, right? Like
Yeah.
Now it's not just
other factors.
Now
It's
it's
more economically
now it's food.
widespread.
It's
Yeah.
eventually going to be unemployment.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
eventually going to it's
Yeah.
gas. It's and so
course.
to me it's like there's too much stress on the average Canadian household.
100%, dude. Did you see that? I think it was Deloitte or one of the accounting firms, or KPMG or somebody, I think, put out a stat that said, the average, like 50% or something crazy of the average like Canadian person is anywhere from like $300 to $500 away per month from hitting that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
essentially,
now-
you've got our whole population living paycheck to paycheck.
Pretty
So
much, and,
Yeah.
and credit line to credit line, and credit accessibility.
taking
and stuff
credit
like
to
that.
pay off another, to
Yeah,
pay
there's
off a
too much
higher
exposure.
credit.
no different than
Taking
the
a
central
HELOC
banks,
to pay
really.
off your credit card, exactly. So let's explore this for a second. So
Sure.
we've talked a lot about central banks. We've talked about the Canadian economy being compared to a Ponzi scheme. Well, how do most Ponzi schemes end?
Terribly.
Terribly,
Yeah.
right? Now, the only Ponzi scheme that probably won't end terribly is one that's controlled by the government, because that's just full control all
Right.
the way through. So are we too big to fail? My answer to that question would be, I sure hope so.
Same.
Because look at Bernie Madoff, the biggest Ponzi scheme ever,
Yeah.
right? That guy was chairman of the SEC, blah
Yeah,
blah blah. Had
good
all these things in place that would insulate him from any bullshit happening. We have the Canadian government doing that
Absolutely.
for us.
Well, of course, when they're
So
using,
who's going to come in and monitor the Canadian government?
So this
to-
is like where when you talk about like
where does
the
that break
geopolitical-
happen, right?
But that's why I think it becomes a geopolitical thing, right?
Right.
Where
So
it's like,
exactly. So
I think that people think like that like anyone in the world gives a shit about Canada. I think that if I'm China, India, America, if I'm any
you're looking
other
over here
powerful-
like this, being
seriously,
like,
they're
yeah,
like,
okay, I'm just
let's
waiting.
watch
Let's
this
just wait.
shit
Let's
burn
just
to the
watch these
ground,
fuckers.
and then
Let's,
say, hey,
uh,
sorry, did you guys want some
Yeah.
money there, sir?
you know where
Yeah.
I think it all goes? Just to answer your question, and I'm going to say some shit, and I hope you guys look into it, but I'm sure you're already familiar. Like, don't forget who the fucking IMF is and the
Right.
role they play when it comes to this stuff. And although we're in the West and we've had the luxury of not really seeing it, the average person doesn't even know what the IMF is.
International
And this isn't
Monetary
like
Fund
conspiracy.
for
This is
yeah.
real. Look at Greece. Look at Cyprus. This is what happens.
No one thought Greece was going under, right? Everyone just goes
course
to
not.
party in Mykonos, and it's the
Exactly,
fucking best,
but
right?
look what the fucking mess is over there.
Yeah.
And is it that far out of scope?
Spain
for
as
that?
well,
Spain,
right?
and
Spain,
a lot of the
Portugal,
Euro,
yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Outside of
Yeah.
like Germany and
Yeah.
like Spain,
Yeah.
Italy, they're not doing well.
No.
Could that happen here? So you know that whole, and I love that we covered so much here. But like, do you guys remember that article that? You guys remember
It's a
that
country
article?
song.
Yeah, fuck. I'll wrap it up. Don't worry. Do you guys remember that article that came out with the what do you call it? That article that came out saying you'll owe nothing, you'll be happy.
Yeah.
Here's how we get there. So now imagine for a second, imagine my thesis plays out correctly. Let's just say you've set the biggest debt trap in history on the back of basically saying we've had the biggest pandemic since the 1918 Spanish flu.
And what, you go Jubilee?
We either go Jubilee, we might have to, which is a cool concept in itself, which basically means debt forgiveness in exchange. And again, like
take the asset?
CBDCs, guys. Like,
Yeah.
and is that crazy? Not really. Great Depression. What did they do? They did an executive order under FDR. You had to submit your gold to the government. You couldn't hold it. You couldn't hoard it.
Mhm.
They used that. They consolidated, and they printed money on the back of having those assets. Could that happen now? Possibly. Are they working on CBDCs or central bank digital currencies? Yes, this is a fact. Look into it. And so, how do you bring something like that into fruition without the general population revolting, essentially? And you do that by creating a catastrophe on this scale. Now, again, I don't want to pretend like I don't disagree with you. The fact that there's like this cabal and like
Mhm.
no, maybe not, but it could have been exploited when the opportunity was present. Because if we look forward ahead 10 years, let's just say, I think systemically capitalism in one way or another would have run its course regardless, just
Yeah.
based on deficits that the US government's running a $30 trillion debt. The Canadian government's at like what, $2 trillion? Like, where does this all go? Do we go back to a surplus in terms of budgets? No.
Ever. Yeah,
Never.
Is that even possible? at this
No,
point?
Right.
slate stage coin clipping shit that you saw with the Roman Empire. But they're not going to let it fail. It is too big to fail. But with every problem comes a reaction, which then creates a solution. And so at some point, and I think you're going to see a meeting happen for this as this gets worse, because we got the rate hikes. That's the biggest squeeze that you're going to see on retail. And at the same time, the assets that are backing the debt, they're going to fall off. And so you're going to have an insolvent system. And when you have that insolvent system, there's not going to be any other solution because we've run all the options out. Could this be the seventh inning where we get one more round of a pump and go back to where we're used to? Maybe. Or could this be then? Also possible.
Have you read The Fourth Turning?
No.
Read the book.
About that shit? It's like,
Yeah,
cool.
it's fucked up. Wild book. Yeah.
Like, are you on par with that? Would you say that you see it that way too? I'm just
I think it's
curious.
within the range of potential
It's
outcomes.
not crazy,
I don't know.
right? Is
no,
it crazy
no,
to think that?
I think
No.
it's like I typically don't end up arriving at those thought processes, mostly because, or maybe not. Like I try not to decide on an outcome. Right?
Yeah.
Like just like what can I do?
Yeah.
What's the next thing that I can
Yeah.
do that's right?
Right.
One step at a time.
Of
So,
course.
but I do think like that's believable within the range of potential outcomes.
I would say so. And I hope I'm wrong, obviously, but just when you look at everything playing out and all the pieces coming together, it's just like what, like how is that even possible?
What's
From
the exit
like what are
strategy?
there really isn't, but also what's the like what was the probability or possibility for all these different little things to come together?
Yeah.
Right?
To create the most volatile time in history.
Pretty much.
Anyways.
I think we need 3 hours.
I was
Yeah, I
gonna
would
say,
say so.
I
We
feel, I
could
feel
go.
like, what are we calling this episode? The Canadian
I don't know.
Ponzi scheme?
I don't
Don't
know.
watch
Ponzi
this.
scheme?
You want to sleep
Don't watch
tonight.
this. We're gonna have to put some clickbait title for
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
but you know what? This was amazing.
Yeah,
I
it
love
was.
fucking having
It
you boys
was.
on,
Yeah.
and for me to come on yours, and we did this like cool collab. Dude, we definitely got to do this again. By the
Yeah,
way,
for sure.
guys, Daniel has one of the best Twitter spaces on Toronto real estate. He just scratched the surface with the stuff that he knows, but go there. You'll get a ton of value. I love it. Keep doing it, bro.
Yeah,
Every
especially for
Thursday.
June 2nd. I think like the next Bank of Canada announcement is going to be a good one. That
Oh,
one's
for
gonna be,
sure.
That one's going to be
For sure.
crazy.
Thousands of
Crazy,
people
crazy.
show up. You got
Yeah.
some we've
Amazing.
got government people, we've got planning people, we've got top agents from
Yeah.
across the country. It's
Yeah,
No, it's
pretty
great.
sweet.
It's a ton of value, dude, that you're offering
Thanks,
people
man.
because most people don't know.
Yeah.
And they, you know, when
Yeah.
I listen, I'm just like, oh man, this is great. Like,
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
You're
Yeah,
gonna
it's
be
a
on
good.
it.
It's cool too because
Yeah.
it's like organic. Like I kind of just let people talk about whatever they want,
yeah.
and like it's just a peek behind the curtains a little
Yeah.
bit, right? Which is nice.
So
This
the-
week's going to be interesting because
Yeah.
it's about realtors, right?
Was
Like
it-
becoming
is
a
that
realtor.
perfect?
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
yeah.
So anyway,
Awesome.
All right.
Dude,
thank
thank
you,
you.
boys. No,
Yeah.
thank you guys.
Thanks
This
for
was
having
great,
us,
and I'm
Mikey.
sure we'll do this again, guys,
For
because
sure, we have
dude,
to.
we can keep going and going and going.
Yeah,
and
we
they'll
have
kill us
to.
if we do.
yeah.
All right, guys.
Thanks,
signing
Scott.
off. Thank you, guys.